A whistle called to me from the woods and dragged me into a horror I will never forget. It was not a spirit or a wild beast. It was a simple man with a whistle that hunted souls like an invisible lasso. This story will make you swear never to answer a call alone, because in the mountains of New Mexico, a sound can be your end. Even now, at 28, with a supposedly stable life, an apartment in Albuquerque overlooking the desert burning at sunset, a job as a trail guide in Carson National Forest, where I teach strangers to respect the land without it devouring you, that whistle returns. It's not a hazy dream. It's sharp, cutting, like a knife sliding through bone. It wakes me at 3 a.m., sweating in tangled sheets, the sound bouncing around my skull, high-pitched, rhythmic, almost playful, like a songbird that has learned to mimic evil. I sit up, heart racing, and run to the window, scanning the empty street to see if the shadows between the streetlights hide a hunched figure with a whistle hanging around their neck. Pathetic, I know. A grown man terrified by an echo from his childhood. But it wasn't just a sound. It was a call, and I, at 13 years old, was one step away from answering it completely. It was the summer of 2010, a scorching July that turned into cold nights high up at Philmont Scout Ranch in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of New Mexico. Philmont is not just any camp. It is a brutal rite of passage disguised as adventure. 140,000 acres of rugged terrain where Boy Scouts of America forge character with 40-pound backpacks, whipping storms, and grizzly bears that prowl the trash cans like exiled kings. I was Kalen Merrick. Kalen, with that hard K than my mother, a history teacher in Taos with Navajo roots diluted by white marriages, chose from a book of Celtic myths because it sounds like a warrior of the wind. 13 years old, skinny as a willow tree, with freckles dotting my nose like fallen stars, and a shyness that made me stutter around campfires. My troop, Santa Fe 472, was a handful of boys from the Southwest. Mestizos, poor whites from dry ranches. A couple of college professors' kids from Las Cruces. 23 souls under the command of Scoutmaster Jethro Bannister, a 52-year-old ex-Marine with a barbed wire mustache and eyes that pierce lies like 445 bullets. Jethro wasn't one to coddle. The forest doesn't care for the weak, Merrick. He would snap at me whenever I complained about blisters on my heels or the weight of my canteen. He had dragged us on a 50-mile trek in 5 days, starting from the base in Cimarron under a sun that turned the dust into an oven. On the first day, we climbed Ute Ridge, lungs burning with thin air at 10,000 feet, breathtaking views of the Valley of the Valley, peaks jagged like shark teeth, meadows of wildflowers dotted with quivering aspens. But by the evening of the third day, camped at Clear Creek, exhaustion had settled in like a permanent guest. Campfire crackled in a clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines, trunks so thick that 3 boys couldn't wrap their arms around them, smoke rising in spirals that smelled of burnt sap and broken promises. We ate chili from cans reheated in sticky tins, hard crackers that crumbled like brittle bones. The boys joked around. Torrin Hale, my best friend, a 14-year-old redhead with a drawling Texas accent and a laugh that sounded like a coyote barking, told dirty jokes about cowboys and brothels that made us blush. Bram Lockwood, the 15-year-old big guy with hands like excavator shovels, competed in burping contests that echoed off the hills. And then there was Leora Voss. No, wait, Leora was a girl from the sister troop camping nearby, but in my memory she blends in with the group. 13 years old, black braided hair and eyes that saw too much. Daughter of a silversmith in Chimayo who gave us turquoise bracelets. But that night, the center of attention was Jethro, his silhouette outlined against the flames, telling stories from Vietnam that weren't stories. Ambushes in jungles that dripped rain like open veins, comrades lost in fog that smelled of napalm and fear. "Listen, boys," he said at last, his voice deep as gravel under boots, while stars pricked the black sky like pins in velvet. "Tomorrow, solo patrol. Each of you goes out at dawn, 1 hour in the woods, no flashlight until the sun paints the treetops. Find a clue, a footprint, a feather, whatever, and bring it back. Build character, teach you to hear what the forest whispers. Collective groans, but no one protested. Jethro had that way of looking at you. Not anger, just quiet disappointment, as if he already knew you would fail. I was assigned the northern sector, the dense pine forest that sloped down to the creek, a maze of soft needles and fallen logs that looked like the ribs of dead giants. I slept poorly that night, curled up in my sleeping bag under a tarp dripping with condensation, the hard ground digging into my hips. Fragmented dreams, my absent father, an oil tanker who left for Alaska when I was 6, leaving behind postcards with bears and empty promises, and shadows moving among the pines, whispering my name in the voice of the wind. I woke before dawn, the camp a murmur of snores and zippers, the air cold as grave breath. Jethro slapped me on the shoulder, his hand calloused like old leather, and handed me a snuffed-out kerosene lantern. "Don't stray too far, Merrick. The forest lies." I nodded, my throat dry, stuffing a granola bar into the pocket of my khaki uniform, the neckerchief loosely knotted around my neck. Dawn was a pink whisper filtering through the treetops, painting the pine forest a dirty gold. I walked alone, my boots sinking into the carpet of needles that muffled my footsteps like fresh snow, the stream gurgling in the distance like a half-spoken secret. The air smelled of sticky resin and damp earth. Early birds chirped in high branches. A hawk screeched over the ridge like a soul in torment. I tried to build character. I knelt beside a rotten log, examining mushrooms sprouting like white fingers, touched rough bark marked by deer claws. Evidence of a male in rut, I thought, remembering Jethro's manual. But the loneliness weighed heavy. Every crack, a pine cone falling, a squirrel scurrying away made me turn, flashlight in hand, even though the sun was already licking the treetops. I thought of Torin, probably splashing in the stream pretending to look for treasure, of Bram breaking branches to impress, of Leora, who swore she hated bugs but always found the rarest flowers. 40 minutes had passed when I heard it for the first time. I was leaning over a mossy rock by the stream, the icy meltwater biting my fingers as I searched for a rainbow trout, proof of wildlife, I told myself, when the silence was broken. A whistle. Low, high-pitched, like the trill of a hummingbird filtered through a rusty metal tube. It wasn't a bird. Birds sing chaotically, freely. This was rhythmic. 3 short notes, pause, 2 long notes, like Morse code twisted into melody. My pulse quickened, a dull drum in my temples. "Torin, is that you, you idiot?" I whispered, straightening up, flashlight sweeping the undergrowth. Nothing. Just the wind whispering in the needles, a rabbit fleeing with white paws flashing. I laughed nervously, blaming fatigue. 3 days of marching had me on edge, and continued on, picking up a black raven feather like a broken wing for my proof. But it didn't last. 10 minutes later, deeper in the pine forest, where the trunks closed in like bars, the whistle returned. Closer, perhaps 20 yards to the east, bouncing off a hollow trunk to amplify like an evil echo. The same notes, but now with a nuance. The pause at the end stretched out as if waiting for a response. I froze, cold sweat beading on my forehead despite the frigid air, flashlight trembling in my sweaty hand. "Jethro, is this a joke?" My voice came out high-pitched, a squeak that would embarrass a 10-year-old. Branches crackled, not wind, not animal, a deliberate weight, like boots stepping on dry twigs. My heart rose into my throat, a pounding fist. I thought of bears. Philmont warned of them. Backpacks hung in trees to avoid curious claws. But a bear doesn't whistle. A cougar, perhaps, mimicking sounds to attract prey. I had read that in a brochure. Mountain cats with deceiving throats. The whistle repeated, insistent, and this time it modulated. Not words, but the rhythm twisted into something familiar. The melody of taps. The The silent salute Jethro played on his bugle every night, but accelerated, playful, as if mocking. I turned, my flashlight cutting through the mottled darkness, illuminating gnarled tree trunks that looked like twisted faces, eyes in knots of wood, mouths in cracks. Nothing, just shadows dancing with my trembling. "Come out of there, Bram, I can see you," I lied, my voice breaking. I backed away, my boots slipping on an exposed root, falling on my ass into the soft bed of pine needles that cushioned the blow but filled my jeans with sticky dirt. The whistle laughed then, not literally, but the next trill rose in pitch, vibrating with something human, malicious. I ran. I didn't think. The prey instinct took the wheel, flashlight bouncing in my fist, beam of light sweeping wildly across trunks that closed in like a living cage. Branches whipped my face, burning lashes that tore skin, warm blood dripping down my cheek like hot tears, pine needles pricking my arms through the sleeves of my uniform. The forest became a maze, paths branching off into the morning mist, mossy rocks I tripped over, rolling downhill in an avalanche of dry leaves and panic. Behind me, the whistle pursued, not screaming but whispering in harmony with my gasping breath. Closer, 15 yards, 10, now mimicking fragments of my name. K, Lan, in whistled pauses, like a wolf howling stolen syllables. The stream saved my sanity. I leapt across it, icy water soaking my boots to the knees, the current pulling at my legs like drowning hands. On the other side, I climbed a steep embankment, nails breaking into clay soil, lungs burning with liquid fire. The whistle faltered, distant now, but persistent. A mocking farewell that melted into the wind. I staggered into the camp clearing, knees shaking like jelly, uniform torn and stained with red mud. The campfire was smoldering ashes, Jethro and the boys waking with lazy yawns, Leora poking the embers with a stick while Torin scratched his tousled head. Whistle, in the woods, someone was calling me. I gasped, doubling over with my hands on my knees, dry heaves twisting my stomach. Jethro stood up, his hunting rifle, a Remington 700 loaded for bears, resting on the stump, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the pine trees. Whistle, animal kid. The others laughed, Bram slapping my back hard enough to make me cough. Kalen heard ghosts, huh? Torin handed me a canteen, warm water that tasted like metal. No one else heard it. No one else ran. Jethro sent me to change, muttering about fevered imagination. But I saw the twitch in his jaw, the Marine smelling something rotten in the air. That day, the trek continued. We packed up tents, green canvas stretched over makeshift poles made of branches, loaded backpacks that creaked under the weight of tents and MRE rations, and marched toward Miranda Backcountry Camp, a hidden valley overlooking Baldy Mountain, which crowned the horizon like a bald skull. We walked in single file, boots pounding eroded mule trails, the sun rising to fry the backs of our necks. I tried to forget. I chatted with Torin about girls at school. He swore he kissed a girl named Sable at the spring dance. Liar. I collected samples for Jethro, a fossil clamshell from the dry creek bed, evidence of past eras when fat rivers lapped these hills. But the forest whispered. Every breeze brought echoes, a distant chirp that could have been a bird or paranoia, a snapping branch that made heads turn. Leora walked nearby, her braid swinging like a pendulum, and she looked at me once, her brown eyes deep as wells. "Are you okay, Kale? You look like you've seen a ghost." I nodded, lying, but her hand on my arm, warm, real, calmed the trembling for a kilometer. We arrived in Miranda at noon, sweaty and with blisters sprouting like volcanoes on our heels. The camp was a rustic oasis. Log cabins abandoned since the days of cowboys, a covered dining area where we could hang our backpacks, and a corral for mules that Jethro used for responsibility lessons, caring for pack animals that kicked like angry mules. We ate dry turkey sandwiches for lunch, the air thick with the ozone of a distant storm. Jethro gathered the troop in a circle, manuals open on our laps. Lone patrol last night. Merrick, your test? I pulled out the Raven quill, broken wing dipped in black ink. Murmurs of approval, but his eyes said, "You survived, that's what counts." That afternoon, activities. Knots in braided manila ropes, fire without matches using flint that singed fingers, and a talk on star navigation that Jethro gave under a sky that clouded over like a bruise. Night fell heavy, clouds rolling in from the west like cannon smoke. We ate venison stew, tough meat we chewed in silence, bones snapping between our teeth, and Jethro played taps on his bugle, melancholy notes floating toward the peaks. I curled up early, my jacket tight against the cold that dropped to 40 degrees, but sleep was elusive. The whistle haunted my mind, playing on loop. Animal? A prank by a rival scout from another troop? Philmont was bustling with groups. Philmont is an anthill of 25,000 kids a year, echoes of laughter and singing bouncing off canyons. But that melody, too personal, too close. Around midnight, I was awakened by distant thunder, lightning painting the clearing in ghostly white. I went out to pee, urine steaming on the ground, flashlight off so as not to alert bears. The forest was a black wall, pines whispering secrets in the wind. And then I heard it again. The whistle. Not in my head, real sharp from the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 yards into the thicket. 3 short notes, pause, 2 long ones. My bladder contracted, stream cutting off midstream. "Jethro," I whispered, but the wind swallowed it. The whistle modulated. K. Lan. Syllables separated by hissing breath, like a man practicing a foreign accent. Heart pounding, I backed toward my tent, thorns pricking my bare calves. Branches crackled, close, too close, and a shadow moved. Not an animal, a human silhouette, hunched over, with something hanging from its neck that caught the lightning. A whistle, metal glinting like a fang. I ran again, blind. Adrenaline, crashing into Torrin's tent, which collapsed in a chaos of fabric and curses. "There's someone! In the trees!" I shouted, my hoarse voice breaking the silence. Jethro came out rifle in hand, flashlight sweeping the edge of the forest like a prison spotlight. The kids huddled together, Bram wielding a woodcutter's axe, Leora with a kitchen knife trembling in her small fist. "Show yourselves," Jethro roared, Marine awakening. Silence. Only wind and rolling thunder. We searched for hours, patrols in pairs, flashlights cutting through the fog that rose from the stream like ghostly breath. Nothing. A partial footprint in the mud. Size 11 boot, worn sole with a zigzag pattern. But Jethro chalked it up to an escaped mule. Nerves, Merrick. The forest plays tricks. But I saw his finger on the trigger, knuckles white. The 4th day dawned stormy, fine rain pricking tents like needles. We packed under makeshift tarps, soaked backpacks weighing like lead. We marched to Crooked Creek, a slippery trail winding through a narrow canyon, red granite walls bleeding water. The group was tense. Torrin joked less. Bram stomped loudly, as if to scare away demons. Leora walked close to me, her shoulder brushing mine in mutual comfort. "Tell me again," she whispered during a break, sitting on mossy rocks, chewing energy bars that tasted like cardboard. I told her everything. The rhythm, the imitation, the shadow. Her eyes widened, but she didn't laugh. "In my village, the elders say that spirits don't whistle. Men do. And men are worse liars. I didn't believe in spirits. I am the son of skeptics, raised in classrooms with blackboards and facts." But her words planted a seed of doubt. We arrived at Crooked Creek at dusk, a camp sunk into a wooded valley, with a suspension bridge over the stream that moaned like a wound. We ate instant noodle soup, steam rising in clouds that hid the stars. Jethro gathered an informal council of war around the campfire. "If there's a madman on the loose, radio the base at dawn, but let's not panic. Scouts don't run from shadows." We nodded, but the fear was palpable, a stench beneath the pine smoke. That night, we kept watch in shifts, me first, sitting on a stump with a flashlight and a stick sharpened as a makeshift spear. The forest breathed, leaves rustling, an owl hooting like a lament, the stream splashing over pebbles. After 1 o'clock, the whistle came again, faint, tempting, from the suspension bridge, notes floating over the water like sonic mist. Kaylan, come. Human, definitely. Breathless at the end, like a smoker panting. I leapt, stick raised, shouting to the sentries. Jethro ran, rifle ready, but the sound faded into rolling thunder. We searched the bridge, rusted cables vibrating in the wind, splintered planks creaking under boots, darkness below swallowing the flashlight. A fresh mark on the railing, a deep scratch, like the nails of a desperate man or a knife testing metal. Someone passed through here minutes ago, Jethro growled, radio crackling at his hip. Low battery, weak signal in the valley. Radio to base, static, promises of help at dawn. We slept armed, tense in a circle like a pioneer fort, but sleep was fragmented. Dreams where the whistle enveloped me like fog, pulling me toward a clearing where a hunched figure waited. Whistle to cracked lips, eyes shining with hunger, not for food. On the 5th day, the terror became real. We woke to thick fog rolling down the valley, visibility 10 feet. We packed quickly, Jethro leading with rifle slung across his chest, Bram and Torrin flanking as bodyguards. The trail climbed steeply toward Sawmill Camp, roots like hidden traps in the mist. We walked silently, boots splashing puddles when Leora stumbled ahead, a muffled scream, her body rolling downhill in an avalanche of dirt and leaves. Leora, I ran, my heart in my throat, Jethro shouting orders. We found her 20 yards down, her leg twisted at an awkward angle, white bone peeking through torn skin like a broken branch. Fresh bruises on her arms, finger marks, large, as if something had dragged her before letting go. No, it wasn't the fall, she sobbed, eyes glazed with shock. A hand, in the fog, pulled me. Panic erupted, kids screaming, Jethro bandaging with the first aid kit, gauze immediately soaking red, radioing emergency. The response crackled. Philmont Base here, helicopter on the way, stay put. But staying put was a trap. As we waited, the whistling surrounded the valley. Multiple now, echoes bouncing off canyon walls like an invisible pack. Kaylan, help. My name, clear as a bell, mixed with cries that sounded like Leora but weren't. We ran in circles, flashlights cutting through useless fog, Bram swinging his axe at moving shadows. Trees, we said. But our hearts knew better. The helicopter arrived at noon, rotors whipping the fog into furious swirls, paramedics descending with a stretcher for Leora, her face pale as a ghost as they hoisted her up. Jethro climbed in with her, radio promising a return, but we, 15 terrified kids, camped in the upper clearing, a tall fire to scare away whatever lurked. That night, without Jethro, leadership fell to me by default, the one who heard first, the marked one. I told stories to calm them, Navajo legends from my mother, trickster coyotes who steal voices. Torrin slept with a knife under his pillow. Bram purred like a wounded bear. But at 2 o'clock, the whistle returned, low, seductive from the undergrowth. Come, just a game. I got up, stick in hand, and went out alone, childish stupidity wanting to prove my courage. The foggy forest was thick soup, the flashlight a blind beacon. I followed the sound, muffled footsteps, branches brushing like fingers. 10 minutes in, the whistle stopped. Absolute silence, the kind that presses on your ears like deep water. Then, a crackle up ahead. A figure emerged. From the mist, hunched over, beard tangled like a rat's nest, sunken eyes shining feverishly. He wore prisoner's rags, faded orange under a threadbare jacket, a metal whistle hanging from a rusty chain around his neck. Harlan Creed, I learned later, fugitive from a federal prison in Colorado, escaped 3 weeks earlier, hunter of young prey in remote mountains, a sadist with a history of kidnappings in the Appalachians, using whistles to mimic lost mothers or friends to lure, drag into caves for games that lasted for days. "Kalen," he whispered, his voice raspy as sandpaper on wood, a crooked smile revealing black teeth. He extended his hand, nails dirty as claws. "Your friend Torin told me where you were. He wants to play." A lie, but panic paralyzed me. I saw the abyss in his eyes, promises of damp darkness, chains on ankles, whistles in ears until death. I ran again, fog swallowing me, branches lacerating my skin, his laughter, not whistling, guttural laughter, chasing me like a bullet. I crashed into the clearing, knocking over the campfire in flying sparks, kids waking up in chaos. Man, with a whistle, in the woods. Torin and Bram dragged me inside, barricading with logs while the whistle surrounded us, mocking, multiplied by echoes. The emergency radio crackled, Jethro returning with rangers, and dawn broke with mules loaded with rifles and bloodhounds. Creed was cornered at noon, fresh tracks leading to a cave on the flank of the ridge, where they found him huddled with a rusty knife and a list of names scribbled down, ours stolen from abandoned backpacks. Leora was saved, her leg in a cast at Tao's General, but the trauma scarred her. She no longer camps. She studies law to hunt monsters in court. Philmont evacuated us, helicopters buzzing like vengeance, headlines in the Santa Fe New Mexican. Fugitive captured at Scout Ranch, Boy Alert's troop. Jethro gave me an engraved silver plaque. Courage at Clear Creek. But the courage was blind survival. I returned home, changed. Weekly nightmares, whistles and desert winds, therapy in Albuquerque where I drew shadows with crayons. Torin enlisted in the Marines. Bram became a rancher in Colorado. Leora a lawyer in Santa Fe. I guide trails now, warning tourists. The forest doesn't lie, men do. That whistle still wakes me, an echo I cannot forget. Because it wasn't the mountain, it was us, fragile in the darkness, called by the worst of humanity. If you camp under the stars, listen, but don't answer. There are sounds you never forget. The slow, deliberate scratching of something, or someone, testing the thin nylon membrane that is the only thing between you and the darkness of the forest. The wet panting of breath that is not animal, but not quite human either. The moment you realize that while you slept, vulnerable and trusting, something was watching you, studying you, deciding what to do with you. Those sounds live in my memory like auditory scars, replaying every time I hear the wind against a window or a branch brushing against a wall. My name is Ilara Whitmore. I am 31 years old, and 14 months ago, I went on a camping trip with friends in the Cascade Mountains of Washington that almost ended in my death. Not because of the obvious dangers you associate with the wilderness, bears, cliffs, hypothermia, but because of something much more terrifying. Another human being. One who had ceased to be civilized, who had crossed some invisible line between sanity and something darker, and who had chosen me as their target. The trip had been the idea of Wren, my best friend since college. She and her boyfriend Stellan, along with another couple, Lyric and Caspian, had planned a weekend camping trip to Serenity Lake, a remote body of water 3 hours from Seattle by road, and then another 2 hours of hiking on barely marked trails. It was late September, just after the summer crowds had disappeared, but before the winter weather made the area inaccessible. The perfect time, according to Wren, to disconnect from the world and reconnect with nature. I had hesitated. I'm a professional nature photographer. I spend a lot of time outdoors, but always with careful plans, appropriate equipment, and an understanding of the risks. This trip felt more casual than I liked, but Wren insisted, and after a particularly stressful year at work, the idea of a few days without Wi-Fi, without deadlines, without responsibilities, sounded tempting. We arrived at the trailhead on a Friday afternoon. The 5 of us loaded down with heavy backpacks. The sky was gray, typical of the Pacific Northwest in autumn, but the rain held off. The hike in was beautiful. Douglas firs towering like cathedrals, ferns so green they almost glowed. the distant sound of water running over rocks. We reached Serenity Lake just as the sun was setting behind the mountain peaks, casting everything in shades of amber and purple. The lake was small, maybe half a mile across, surrounded entirely by dense forest, except for a small clearing at the north end where generations of campers had created an informal site. There was a fire ring made of blackened rocks, a few logs arranged as seats, and enough flat ground for 4 or 5 tents. We were completely alone. Not another camper in sight. Not a sound except the wind in the trees and the occasional splash of a fish jumping in the lake. "See?" said Wren, spinning around with her arms outstretched. "Paradise. Just us and nature." We set up camp efficiently. Stellan and Caspian pitched the tents while Wren, Lyric, and I organized the cooking gear and started the fire. The 2 couples shared tents, Wren and Stellan in one, Lyric and Caspian in another. I, single and proud of it, had my own small tent set up about 20 feet from the fire, slightly apart from the other 2. By 8 o'clock that evening, we had a roaring fire and were cooking sausages on sticks while passing around a bottle of whiskey. The conversation flowed easily. Inside jokes from college, embarrassing work stories, plans for the future. Wren and Stellan had just gotten engaged and wanted our opinion on wedding venues. Lyric had recently accepted a job in San Francisco and was trying to convince Caspian to move with her. I talked about my upcoming photography exhibition, which was finally gaining some serious attention in the Seattle art community. It was perfect. One of those rare moments when everything feels right. Good friends, good food, beautiful surroundings. The kind of night you memorize because you know they are precious and fleeting. Around 10 o'clock, fog began to roll in from the lake. At first, it was just wisps of fog, beautiful in a ghostly way. But it quickly thickened, becoming so dense that we couldn't see more than 10 feet from the fire. The surrounding trees disappeared. The lake disappeared. It was as if our little circle of firelight was floating in a white void. "Creepy," Lyric murmured, moving closer to the fire. "It's just fog," Stellan said, though his tone was less confident than usual. "It happens all the time on mountain lakes. It'll clear up in the morning." But there was something about this fog that felt different. Heavier, more oppressive, and with it came a silence. The wind had completely died down, and the normal nighttime sounds of the forest, owls, insects, small animals moving, had faded away. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. "I think I'm going to bed," I announced around 11. The whiskey had made me sleepy, and the fog was becoming unpleasant rather than atmospheric. "Big day tomorrow with the hike around the lake." "We will too soon," Wren said, yawning. "We're just going to finish this last drink." I walked the 20 feet to my tent, using my headlamp to navigate through the fog. The tent was a 2-person tent, large enough for me and my gear. I had set up my sleeping bag, an inflatable pillow, and a few other essentials earlier. Now I crawled inside, zipped it all the way up, both the inner mesh layer and the outer rain cover, and changed into my sleepwear, thermal leggings, and a thick sweatshirt. Mountain nights in September were cold. I crawled into my sleeping bag, which was rated for 20 degrees and was comfortably warm. My headlamp illuminated the inside of the tent with a soft glow. I read a few pages of a book on my Kindle, then turned off the light around 11:30. The darkness was absolute. There was no moon visible through the fog. There was no starlight, just complete black. I could hear the muffled voices of my friends still around the fire, laughing about something. The sound was comforting. I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. My phone was at the bottom of my backpack in airplane mode, so I had no way to check. But the darkness felt deeper, heavier. The voices around the fire had ceased. Everyone had gone to sleep. Something had woken me. A sound. What was it? I lay completely still in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, listening. There. Again. A scratch. Soft but distinct. Like nails or fingers, slowly sliding down the outside of my tent. My first thought, animal. Probably a raccoon or a curious weasel investigating food smells. We had been careful to store all our food in bags, hung from trees away from the camp, but perhaps there was some residual smell on my clothes. "Shoo!" I said loudly, banging on the inside of the tent. "Go away!" The scratching stopped. Silence. I waited, my heart beating faster now, wide awake. 30 seconds. 1 minute. Nothing. I'd probably scared the animal away. Problem solved. I forced myself to relax back into my sleeping bag, closing my eyes. Then I heard it again. But this time it was different. It wasn't a casual scratch from an animal. It was slow, deliberate, methodical, as if fingers were tracing the shape of the tent, exploring, testing, and it was coming from the opposite side of where it had been before. There was someone, walking around my tent. Fear hit me like a wave of icy water. My breathing became shallow. My body froze in a fetal position inside my sleeping bag. "Hello?" I called, my voice coming out as a trembling quack. "Ren? Stellan? Is it one of you?" No answer, but the scratching continued. Now it was at the back of my tent. Fingers. Definitely fingers. I could make out the pattern now, pressing lightly against the nylon, denting it inward in individual spots. "This isn't funny," I said louder. "If it's you, Caspian, I swear I'll—" The scratching stopped abruptly. Then I heard something that turned my blood to ice. Breathing, heavy, labored, right outside my tent wall. So close I could hear every wet inhale and ragged exhale. This wasn't my friends playing a prank. This wasn't an animal. This was a human being, someone standing right outside my tent, breathing hard, as if they had been running or exerting themselves, or as if they were struggling to control some impulse. "Who's there?" My voice was barely a whisper now. "What do you want?" The breathing continued. There was no verbal response. But then I heard a new sound, a sound that made me realize this was much worse than I had imagined. The sound of a zipper being slowly opened, not the zipper on my tent, the zipper on the outer rain cover. Someone was trying to get in. Pure panic flooded me. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, my hands frantically searching for my headlamp. I found it, turned it on, the beam of light illuminating the inside of my tent. I could see the shadow through the nylon. A human figure, large, hunched over the zipper of the rain cover, working to open it. "Help!" I screamed as loud as I could. "Ren! Stellan! Help!" The figure froze. For a second, 2 seconds, everything was completely still. Then I heard the sound of footsteps, fast, moving away, running into the forest. My tent shook as they ran past, branches snapping, leaves crunching. And then, silence again. I sat in my tent, shaking violently, still clutching my headlamp, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. Voices from outside. "Ilara, what happened? Are you okay?" The zippers of the other tents being opened, flashlights flickering in the fog. "There was someone there," I shouted. "Someone was trying to get into my tent." Stellan arrived first, with a flashlight in one hand and a camping knife in the other. What do you mean, someone?" "A person, outside my tent. They were trying to open the zipper." Ren was now standing next to Stellan, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Are you sure? Couldn't it have been an animal?" "It was a person. I saw them. I saw their shadow." Caspian and Lyric had now emerged as well. The 5 of us stood in the thick fog, our flashlights creating cones of light that penetrated no more than a few feet. "I'm going to check around," Stellan said, raising his knife. "Caspian, come with me. Girls, stay together near the fire." The 2 men disappeared into the fog. Ren, Lyric, and I huddled near the dying fire, which Lyric revived by adding more wood. The heat and light felt comforting, but the fog surrounded us like a wall, turning us into a small island of visibility in an ocean of white. "What exactly did you see?" Ren asked softly. I tried to explain. The scratch, the breathing, the shadow, the zipper being opened. But as I spoke, I began to doubt myself. Had I really seen a shadow? Or had I just seen the movement of my own tent in the wind? Could the breathing have been an animal after all? The zipper being open, just the sound of nylon rubbing against itself? It was probably a bear, Lyric said, though her voice sounded uncertain. I've heard they're curious, especially if they think there's food around. It didn't sound like a bear, I insisted. It sounded human. Stellan and Caspian returned 10 minutes later. Nothing, Stellan reported. We checked the entire perimeter of the camp. There's no one here, no fresh tracks that we can see, but the fog makes it hard to see anything. Maybe it was just a dream, Caspian suggested. A vivid one. I've had those when I'm sleeping outdoors. The brain does weird things. It hadn't been a dream. I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had seen. But looking at my friends' faces, concerned but also skeptical, I began to wonder if I was right. Why don't you sleep in our tent tonight? Wren offered. There's plenty of room. You'll be more comfortable, safer. Part of me wanted to accept, but another part, the stubborn, independent part that had led me to become a solo nature photographer in the first place, resisted. I'll be fine, I said. You're probably right. It was probably just an animal or my imagination. I'm going back to sleep. But I knew I wouldn't sleep. Not that night. I returned to my tent, this time leaving my headlamp on. I checked the outer zipper, the one I had been sure someone had been trying to open. It looked fine, no damage, no sign of tampering. Maybe I had been dreaming. Maybe fear and fog and darkness had conspired to make a curious raccoon sound like a human stalker. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, but this time I sat propped up against my backpack, facing the tent entrance, my utility knife in my hand. My headlamp cast strange shadows that danced on the nylon walls. The hours passed, slowly, painfully. Every sound, every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind, every drop of condensation falling from the trees made me jump, but nothing happened. No more scratches, no breathing, no shadows. Maybe it really had been my imagination. When the gray light of dawn began to filter through the fog, I finally allowed myself to relax. I had survived the night. Everything was fine. We had packed up and would be leaving in a few hours, and this would just be an embarrassing funny story about that time I got scared by a raccoon. I left my tent around 6 a.m., exhausted but relieved. The fog was lifting, burning off in the morning sun. I could see the lake now, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the trees and sky like a mirror. Caspian was already awake, stoking the fire for morning coffee. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Not great," I admitted. "But I'm fine. Sorry about last night's drama." "Don't apologize. The forest can be scary at night. It's easy for your mind to play tricks on you." I nodded, wanting to believe that. Then I saw something. About 10 feet behind my tent, where the campground met the forest, there was a patch of mud where the morning dew had pooled. And in that mud were footprints. Boot prints, large ones, human footprints. They led straight from the trees to the back of my tent. Then they walked around the perimeter, exactly the pattern the scratch had followed. And then they led back into the woods with long strides like someone running. "Caspian," I said, my voice barely working. "Look at this." He came closer, followed my gaze, and his face turned pale. "Shit." The others woke up at our voices. We all gathered around the footprints, staring at them in silent, growing horror. "It wasn't your imagination," Wren said quietly. "Someone was here." Stellan took out his phone, snapping photos of the footprints. "We need to report this to the park rangers when we get out." "Should we leave now?" Lyric asked, her voice tense. "What if they're still out there?" "It's daylight," Caspian said. "If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done something last night when Alara was alone. It was probably just some drunk hiker being creepy." But I wasn't so sure. There was something about those footprints, the size, the deliberate pattern, that suggested something more sinister than a lost drunk. We decided to pack up and leave immediately. The plan had been to spend another night, but no one felt comfortable staying now. As I took down my tent, I noticed something else. At the base of the outer zipper, the one I had been sure someone had been trying to open, there were 3 torn nylon fibers, as if someone had been pulling on it, trying to force it open. I showed it to Stellan. His jaw tightened. "Let's pack up quickly." We were ready to leave in 30 minutes, but as Caspian was putting out the fire, kicking dirt over the embers, his foot hit something at the edge of the fire ring. "What the hell?" He bent down and picked something up. We all crowded around to see. It was a knife, but not a normal camping knife. It was a large hunting knife, 10-inch blade, serrated edge, black handle with dark spots that could have been mud or... "Is that blood?" Lyric whispered. Stellan took the knife from Caspian, examining it carefully. "I don't know. It could be. Or it could be tree sap or something else." "Why would someone leave a knife here?" Ren asked. "Maybe they dropped it when Alara screamed," Caspian suggested. "They got scared and ran off without it." Which meant that whoever had been outside my tent hadn't just been lurking. They'd been armed. If they'd managed to open that zipper... I couldn't complete the thought. My body began to shake again. "We're leaving," Stellan said firmly. "Now." The walk out was the longest of my life. Every sound in the forest made me jump. Every shadow between the trees looked like a lurking figure. I kept expecting someone to jump out of the woods, knife raised, finishing what they had tried to start. But nothing happened. We reached the trailhead without incident. We drove straight to the nearest ranger station. The ranger on duty, a woman in her 50s named Juniper, listened to our story with an increasingly grave expression. When Stellan placed the knife on her desk, she recognized it immediately. "That's a K-bar knife," she said. "Military knife, not something casual hikers usually carry." "What do you think it was doing there?" Ren asked. Juniper hesitated. "Have you seen the news lately? About the escaped convict?" We all shook our heads. 3 days ago, a man escaped from state prison during a transfer. His name is Dalton Reeves, 42 years old, convicted of multiple aggravated assaults, considered extremely dangerous. They believe he's hiding somewhere in the Cascades. The room seemed to spin. Do you think it was him?" "I don't know. But these footprints," he looked at the photos Stellan had taken, "are from heavy work boots, the kind issued to prisoners. And the knife could have been stolen from a guard or taken from somewhere else during his escape." "Why would he come near our camp?" I asked, though I feared the answer. Juniper looked at me with something that resembled pity. "If it's Reeves, he's been in the woods for days. No proper food, no shelter, probably desperate. And campers, especially isolated campers, are easy targets. Food, gear, even..." She paused. "Even what?" "Even hostages. If he's trying to escape the area, he might need a human shield. Or transportation." The horror of what had almost happened hit me fully. If that man, Dalton Reeves or whoever he was, had managed to break into my tent, if he had grabbed me before I could scream, if my friends hadn't been close enough to hear. "You need to give formal statements," Juniper said, "and I'm going to alert the search team that you have confirmed activity in the Serenity Lake area. Hopefully they'll catch him soon." We spent the next 2 hours giving detailed statements to law enforcement officers. I described everything I could remember: the sounds, the breathing, the shadows, the feeling of fingers pressing against my tent. An officer asked me, "Did you see its face? Any distinguishing features?" "No, just its shadow through the nylon. It was big, that's all I know." "Did it say anything?" "No. It just breathed, like it was trying to decide what to do." The officer exchanged glances with his partner. "You're lucky to be alive." "I knew that. God, I knew that. They told us to go home, that they would keep us informed." We drove back to Seattle in mostly silence, each of us processing what had happened. 2 days later, the detective who had taken my statement called. "I thought you'd want to know. We caught Dalton Reeves this morning. He was camping illegally about 2 miles from Serenity Lake. He tried to resist arrest, but was subdued without injury." "Was it him?" I asked. The one outside my tent? He admitted to finding your camp. He said he was watching, trying to decide whether to steal your gear or something else. When you yelled, he got scared and ran away. He dropped the knife in his haste. Something else. There was a long pause. Reeves has a history of sexual assault in addition to his other crimes. If he had entered that tent, well, it's better not to think about it. But I thought about it. I thought about it constantly. That night played on a loop in my mind for months. The sound of fingers tearing nylon. The heavy breathing. The hunched shadow over the zipper. All the ways it could have ended differently. If I had accepted Wren's offer to sleep in her tent. If I had been slower to yell. If my friends had been sleeping too deeply to hear. If. My therapist, I started seeing one after the first 2 weeks of insomnia and panic attacks, said I had PTSD, that my brain had experienced a real death threat and had been rewired to be hypervigilant, always on the lookout for danger. Especially in spaces where you feel vulnerable, she explained, like in a tent, or sleeping, or in isolated places. She was right. I couldn't camp for months afterward. Even the idea of being in a tent made me feel claustrophobic and terrified. My work as a nature photographer suffered. How could I take photos in the desert when every sound made me jump? But slowly, with therapy and support from friends, I began to heal. I started with daytime walks in populated areas, then longer hikes with friends. Eventually, almost a year after the incident, I forced myself to camp again, but only at established campgrounds with rangers nearby and lots of people around. And I never, ever camp alone. I never trust the vulnerability of being in a tent in the woods with only thin nylon between me and whatever lurks in the dark. Because I learned something at Serenity Lake. The greatest danger in the wilderness isn't bears or cougars or the weather. It's another human being. One who has crossed some line, who no longer respects the basic rules of civilization, who sees other human beings as targets rather than people. And those predators are more common than you think. They're out there now, hiding in forests and mountains, waiting for unsuspecting hikers to venture too far from safety. Sometimes I still wake up in the night. Sure, I hear that sound. Slow, scratching against fabric. The gasping of breath. The shadow moving in my peripheral vision. But now I'm in a house with solid locks and an alarm system. Now I have a big dog that sleeps next to my bed. Now I have pepper spray and a charged phone and neighbors within shouting distance. Now I am safe. But the memory remains. The trauma doesn't completely go away. And every time I see a tent, in a sporting goods store, in a photo, in a commercial, for a second I am back there, in total darkness, with fingers tearing at my shelter, and an inhuman breath just on the other side of the wall, waiting, deciding, about to act. That's the moment I relive over and over. Not what happened next, the escape, the survival, the rescue, but that moment of anticipation, when anything could have gone either way, when my life hung on a criminal stranger's decision about whether it was worth the risk to enter that store, and the most terrifying truth, that he made the right decision from his perspective, that he waited, that he planned, that he would have succeeded if I hadn't screamed just in time. That's the part that keeps me awake. Not what happened, but how close something much, much worse came to happening, and knowing that for every survival story like mine, there are other stories, other stores, other hikers who didn't scream in time, who didn't have friends nearby, who became another tragic desert statistic. I'm not special. I wasn't particularly brave or smart. I was just lucky. That's the hardest lesson from Serenity Lake. Sometimes survival is just luck, and no amount of preparation or caution can guarantee that next time, if there is a next time, luck will be on your side again. That's why I'll never sleep in a tent again without worrying about what might be tearing at it from the outside, testing, waiting, deciding if this time it will unzip all the way. There are moments that divide your life into a before and after so absolute that you are never the same person again. For me, that moment came submerged in ice-cold water, my hands brushing against something my brain refused to process. Cold, swollen skin, inhuman in texture but unmistakably human in form. The eyes, God, the eyes, staring at me through the murky water with a silent accusation that haunts me every time I close my own. That was 2 years ago, and I still can't take a shower without the tap water bringing me back to that river, to that body, to that moment when I understood that death is not always found in prepared places like hospitals or funeral homes. Sometimes it waits for you at the bottom of a river, tied with rope, waiting for someone, some unsuspecting fool like me, to discover it. My name is Indigo Mercer. I'm 23 years old, and 2 years ago I participated in what was supposed to be a transformative experience, a week-long youth leadership retreat in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. I was volunteering for a non-profit in Albany that worked with at-risk youth, and my supervisor, an optimistic and tirelessly positive man named Talon, had insisted that this retreat would be exactly what I needed to reconnect with my purpose. He was right, I suppose. I did reconnect with something, only it wasn't my purpose. It was my mortality, my vulnerability, my understanding that the world contains horrors you can't predict or control, and that sometimes they find you when you're at your most unprepared. The camp was called Riverbend Wilderness Retreat, a name that now makes me shudder, but at the time sounded picturesque and adventurous. It was located in a remote valley where the Sacandaga River meandered through dense forests of pine and spruce. The camp itself was rustic but comfortable. Log cabins, a communal dining hall, basic facilities. And the river, the damn river, was the centerpiece of it all. Camp activities revolved around it. Kayaking, fishing, swimming, and the infamous river crossing that was supposed to teach teamwork and overcoming fears. We arrived on a Sunday in July, 16 participants between the ages of 18 and 25, plus 4 facilitators. I knew some of the others, co-workers from other nonprofits in the region, but most were strangers. Among them was Saffron, a girl my age with green-dyed hair and an infectious laugh who I immediately liked. Orion, a quiet guy with an engineering background who clearly preferred machines to people, and Marlo, our lead facilitator, a woman in her 30s with the tireless energy of someone who truly, genuinely loved being outdoors. The first day was orientation, getting to know each other, basic team-building exercises. All pretty standard. But I could feel the anticipation building as Marlo described the activities to come. A 5-mile hike, a high ropes course, and the main event on day 2, the river crossing, or it's a riverbend tradition, she explained enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling. We wade across the river at its widest point. The water will be waist deep, maybe chest deep in some spots. The current is strong, so you'll hold on to each other, work as a team. It's physically challenging, but incredibly rewarding. On the other side, there's a small island where we'll have lunch. It's beautiful, and the sense of accomplishment when you complete the crossing, trust me, it's transformative. I felt nervous. I'm not a strong swimmer. I grew up in the city, not near natural bodies of water. Public pools were one thing, controlled, chlorinated, with lifeguards. But a wild river, with unpredictable currents and unknown depths, was something else entirely. How strong is the current? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. It's manageable, Marlo replied. We've done this hundreds of times without incident. Just follow the instructions, stay together, and you'll be fine. We have life jackets for anyone who feels more comfortable wearing them. I decided I would definitely wear one. That night, lying in my bunk in the cabin I shared with Orion and 2 other guys, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the river. I could hear it from the open window, a constant murmur that should have been soothing but instead sounded ominous, as if the water were whispering warnings I couldn't quite understand. Nervous about tomorrow, Orion asked from the bottom bunk. A little. You? Not really. I grew up near a river in Oregon. I used to swim in currents all the time. Lucky you, I said, unable to hide my envy. Hey, you'll be fine. Just stay with the group and don't fight the current. If you start to panic, just float and someone will grab you. His words were meant to be reassuring, but all I heard was start to panic and just float, as if these were inevitabilities rather than possibilities. Day 2 dawned clear and hot, a perfect summer day with the sun shining relentlessly from a cloudless sky. The temperature was already in the 80s by 9 in the morning, and it was expected to reach the mid-90s by the afternoon. The heat was oppressive, making even standing still feel like work. Perfect day to get wet, Marlowe said cheerfully over breakfast. The river water will be refreshing. After breakfast, we changed into swim clothes and water shoes. I wore my swimsuit, a synthetic t-shirt that would dry quickly, and old hiking boots that I didn't mind ruining. Marlowe had said shoes were essential. The riverbed was full of rocks, some slippery with algae, others sharp, and the life jacket. I made sure to get one that fit snugly, fastening all the straps with hands that trembled slightly with nervous anticipation. Saffron laughed when she saw me. Wow, you're really getting ready, huh? I'd rather be alive and embarrassed than drowned and brave, I replied. Fair enough. I should get one too. We walked to the river as a group, a noisy and lively procession of young people, with towels and waterproof backpacks containing our lunches. The trail descended a steep slope for about 500 feet before leveling off onto a gravel beach where the river widened significantly. Seeing the river in broad daylight, knowing I was about to enter it, triggered a wave of anxiety. It was wider than I had imagined, maybe 60 or 70 feet from bank to bank. The water was opaque brown, impossible to see through. And the current, God, the current. Even from the bank I could see how fast the water was moving, swirling around rocks, creating small rapids in some places. All right, everyone, Marlowe said, gathering us together. Here's the plan. We're going to cross in 2 groups of 8. My group will go first. We'll link arms, forming a line with the strongest on the ends to anchor. We'll move slowly, testing each step before committing. The water will be cold, probably 55 or 60 degrees, so take a deep breath when you step in. The current will be strongest in the middle, so we'll hold on extra tight there. Questions? I had a million, but no one else said anything, so I kept quiet. I was assigned to the first group along with Saffron, Orion, and 5 others. Marlowe would be at one end, anchoring. The biggest facilitator, a guy named Theron, would be at the other end. I was in the middle, supposedly the safest place, between Saffron and Orion. All right, let's go. We entered the river. The icy water hit my feet like electricity, so cold it took my breath away. Saffron hissed beside me, "Shit, that's cold." "Remember, breathe," Marlowe said. "Get past the initial shock." We linked arms. My left arm linked with Saffron's right, my right arm with Orion's left. The formation felt solid, secure, 8 bodies moving as one. The first 10 feet were relatively easy. The water barely reached my knees, the current present but manageable. The bottom was rocky but stable. Then the riverbed began to slope downward. The water rose to my thighs, then to my waist. The current grew stronger, pushing against me, trying to move me downstream. My feet slipped on algae-covered rocks. I clung to Saffron and Orion more tightly. Small steps, Marlowe reminded us. Test each foothold. We were going slower now, each step deliberate and careful. The water was up to my chest. I could feel the force of the current pulling at my legs, trying to sweep me away. My life jacket made me float slightly, which paradoxically made it harder to keep my feet on the bottom. "We're reaching the deepest point," Marlowe said, "almost halfway." The water rose higher. Now it was at my shoulders. If it rose a little higher, it would cover me completely. My heart was pounding wildly. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to return to the safety of the shore, but I couldn't. I was in the middle of the line, surrounded by others. Backing out would break the formation. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I whispered to myself like a mantra. Then my foot found nothing. I'd been testing forward, looking for the next solid rock, when suddenly there was no bottom. My foot slid down, finding nothing. I lost my balance. The current seized that moment of imbalance. It ripped me from the line. 1 second I was linked with Saffron and Orion, secure in the formation. The next, I was letting go. Or they were letting go, I don't know which. And I was being swept downstream. "Indigo!" Saffron's cry was muffled by the roar of the water in my ears. I tried to swim, to fight the current, but it was like trying to push against a solid wall. The water spun me around, submerged me, dragged me under. I inhaled water. I coughed. I panicked. The life jacket kept me afloat, my head breaking the surface for seconds before being submerged again. I saw flashes of sky, trees, brown water. Everything was spinning. My hands clawed at anything, rocks, branches, pure desperation. I needed something, anything to stop this uncontrolled drift downstream. My hand found something, a large rock jutting out of the water. I grabbed it, my fingers slipping on the wet surface but managing to hold on. The current pulled at my body, trying to rip me away, but I held on with strength born of pure panic. I could hear voices shouting, Marlowe, the others, but they seemed distant, insignificant compared to the roar of the river. I pulled myself around the rock, searching for a shallower spot, a foothold, anything. The water here was chaotic, swirling around submerged rocks, creating small whirlpools. My foot found something solid, a rock. I pushed down, using the leverage to pull myself closer to the shore, and then my leg brushed against something. Not a rock, not a branch, fabric. Torn fabric tangling around my calf. My brain didn't process it at first. I thought maybe it was trash. An old shirt, a bag, something someone had thrown away. I tried to kick free, but the fabric moved. It slid against my skin in a way that sent all the wrong instincts screaming. I looked down into the murky water, and I saw a face, pale, swollen, open, glassy eyes staring up at me from beneath the surface. A body. A human body, tied to a large rock with rope, floating suspended in the current like sinister seaweed. Terror hit me so hard I literally couldn't breathe. My lungs froze. My heart stopped. I was looking at a corpse in the river, inches away from me. Its face was swollen and unrecognizable. Whether from decomposition or from being submerged, I didn't know and didn't want to know. But the eyes were open, staring. Not through me, but directly at me, as if they saw me, as if they wanted to tell me something. The mouth was open too, as if it had been screaming when... No. I couldn't complete that thought. The fabric I had felt was a shirt, a faded flannel shirt clinging to a bloated torso, and there was rope, thick, professional rope, wrapped around the body's waist, tying it to the large rock below. Someone had put it there, intentionally. They had tied it down to keep it underwater, hidden, waiting. The horror, the pure visceral horror of being in the water with a corpse, of having touched dead skin, of having those eyes staring at me. It was too much. I screamed, an animalistic, primitive scream that I didn't know I was capable of. I screamed and screamed as I pushed myself away from the body, kicking wildly, swimming with a strength born of absolute panic. I don't know how I made it to shore. I don't remember swimming. I just remember suddenly being in shallow water, crawling over rocks, my hands and knees bleeding where they were cut, but feeling nothing except the overwhelming need to get out of the water. I collapsed on the gravel beach, coughing up water, shaking violently. Someone, Orion I think, was beside me saying my name, asking if I was okay. "There's a body," I gasped. "In the water. A body, I saw it. I touched it, it's tied to a rock." "What? Indigo, calm down." "A damn body," I shouted, my voice breaking. "There's a dead person in that river." The entire camp froze. Everyone was looking at me, some with concern, others with obvious skepticism. Marlowe came over, kneeling beside me. "Indigo, you just had a scare. Your mind can play tricks on you when you're under stress." It wasn't a trick. I saw a face. I saw eyes. There was a shirt and rope and... I couldn't finish. The retching hit me, and I vomited river water and bile onto the gravel. "He's in shock," someone said. "We need to get him back to camp," said another. But Theron, the big facilitator who had been at the end of our line, didn't seem so dismissive. "Where?" he asked me. "Where did you see this?" With a trembling hand, I pointed downstream. "Maybe 20 feet. There's a big rock jutting out, the body's underneath, tied up." Theron exchanged glances with Marlowe. "I'll check it out." "Theron, there's probably nothing. If there's even the slightest chance you saw something real, I need to verify it. Stay with the kids." I watched, still shaking uncontrollably on the bank, as Theron waded back into the river. He swam to the rock I had described, then dove underwater. He was underwater for what felt like an eternity. 30 seconds. 45. When he resurfaced, his face was pale. "Call the police," he yelled to Marlowe. "Now." The confirmation hit me like a second shock. It had been real. It wasn't my imagination or panic or my brain playing tricks. There really was a dead body down there. The next few minutes were chaos. Marlowe was on his satellite phone. The campground had no cell service, contacting the authorities. Other facilitators were gathering the campers, keeping us away from the river, trying to tell us that everything was fine, that it was just a precaution. But I knew. And from the looks on some faces, others were beginning to understand too. Something terrible had happened here, and I had found it. The police arrived in 40 minutes, county deputies, then what seemed like the entire sheriff's department, then crime scene investigators, then divers. They transformed our quiet beach into an active crime scene. They kept us away, but wouldn't let us leave. They needed statements, especially mine. A detective, a woman in her 40s named Yara Kensington, sat with me on the edge of the dining room. "I need you to tell me exactly what you saw," she said softly. "Every detail you can remember." I tried. God, I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those eyes, that open mouth. The face was swollen, I managed to say. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but there was rope, thick rope around the waist, tying it to a rock, as if someone had put it there on purpose. "Did you see anything else? Distinguishing marks? Jewelry?" I shook my head. It all happened so fast. I just saw the face and I had to get out. She nodded sympathetically. "You did the right thing. Finding something like that is traumatic. We'll arrange for you to talk to someone, a trauma counselor, as soon as possible." The divers eventually recovered the body. They didn't let us watch. They kept us inside the dining room, but we could hear the activity outside. Voices, the splash of water, the sound of a body bag being zipped shut. Hours passed before Detective Kensington returned with information. "The victim is male, 35 to 45 years old. He's been in the water for about a week, maybe 2. There was rope tying him down, just as you described. There was also weight, rocks placed in his clothing to keep him submerged." "Was it murder?" Saffron asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We're treating it as a suspicious death until we know more," Kensington said carefully. "But based on the circumstances, the binding, the weight, it's clearly unnatural. Unnatural." What a gentle way of saying that someone had killed this person and tried to hide the body at the bottom of a river. "How many people have crossed this river?" Orion asked suddenly. "You said this camp makes the crossing a tradition. How many people have walked over that body without knowing?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Dozens. Maybe hundreds in the last 2 weeks. All innocently wading over a hidden corpse. And I had been the idiot who found it. They kept us for further questioning for another hour, then finally let us go back to our cabins. The retreat was officially over. No one would stay at a camp that had just become a crime scene. We would pack up in the morning. That night, lying in my bunk, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, that frozen expression, those eyes staring at me. What had they seen? What had they experienced in their final moments? And worst of all, who had put them there? The answer came 3 days later. Detective Kensington called me personally. "We've identified the victim," she said. "His name was Dashiell Thorne, 41 years old, from Albany, reported missing 2 weeks ago by his sister." Albany, only an hour from where I lived. "Was it murder?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. The autopsy determined that he died of asphyxiation. There was water in his lungs, but also evidence of blunt force trauma to the head that occurred before he entered the water. Someone struck him, probably knocking him unconscious, then weighted him down and put him in the river to drown. The horror of that, being unconscious, waking up underwater, tied up, unable to escape, struggling as your lungs filled, made me feel sick. "Do you have a suspect?" "We're following several leads. But Indigo, there's something you should know. Dashiell Thorne was struggling with severe depression. He had made multiple suicide attempts in the last 2 years. His therapist had expressed concern about his mental state weeks before his disappearance." "Are you saying it was suicide?" "We're considering that possibility, that he tied himself down with weights and entered the river intentionally. People can do that, tie themselves up, and it's rare but not unheard of. Some suicides are elaborate. The person wants to make sure they can't change their mind at the last minute. The idea was horrible, that someone was so desperate, so determined to die that they would devise this meticulous plan, that they would choose to drown, one of the most terrifying deaths imaginable. But another part of me wondered, was it really possible? Could someone really tie themselves to heavy rocks and walk into a river alone? "We're still investigating," Kensington added. "If we find definitive evidence of foul play, you'll know, but I wanted to give you closure on what we can." Closure. As if knowing how he died could somehow erase the memory of touching his body, of seeing his eyes. Months passed before the case was officially closed. The autopsy and investigation concluded that Dashiell Thorne had died by suicide. There was no evidence of another person involved. There was no struggle. There were no witnesses. Just a desperate man who had chosen a horrible, lonely end. His sister, Fauna Thorne, spoke to the press about her brother's mental health, about how the system had failed him, about how we need better resources for people in crisis. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't want to be the guy who found the body. I didn't want to be defined by that moment. But it didn't matter what I wanted. Trauma doesn't ask permission to stay. I quit my job at the nonprofit 2 months later. I couldn't go on. Every time I saw water, a river in a park, a lake in a photo, even rain against a window, I was back there, touching death, looking into lifeless eyes. My therapist, I started seeing one after the first week of constant nightmares, said I had PTSD, that finding a dead body, especially so unexpectedly and violently, creates deep trauma. Your brain is trying to process something it has no context for, she explained. Most people never find a dead body, certainly not while fighting for their own lives in a river. Your nervous system is in overdrive, constantly looking for similar danger. She was right. Months later, I still couldn't bathe without anxiety. I couldn't swim. I couldn't be near bodies of water without panicking. And worst of all, I couldn't stop thinking about Dashiell Thorne. What had led him to that river? What he had felt in those last moments? If he had been afraid? If he had suffered? Sometimes I wonder if his eyes, those open eyes staring at me, had been intentional. If on some level, even in death, he had wanted to be found. He had wanted someone to know he had been there. And I was that person. For better or worse, I was the one who found him. Now, 2 years later, I can talk about it without shaking. I can tell the story without feeling immediate nausea. I can function. But some things are never the same. I will never look at water the same way again. I will never enter a river again without wondering what secrets lie beneath its surface. Because I learned something on the Sacandaga River. The world is full of hidden tragedies, bodies buried, not in earth but in water. Interrupted stories that no one knows about until you accidentally stumble upon them. And some of us have the horrible misfortune of being the ones who stumble. That is my story, my trauma, my burden. The day the river showed me its secret and changed who I was forever. Sometimes I still dream about those eyes, about that swollen face, about the feeling of torn fabric brushing against my leg, and I wake up sweating, coughing, feeling like I still have river water in my lungs. The river no longer holds that secret. Dashiell Thorne was recovered, identified, laid to rest, but the trauma it left behind, the horror of that encounter, lives on in me. And it will probably live there for the rest of my life. Every time I hear water running, every time I see eyes staring at me from a crowd, every time I feel something unexpectedly brush against my leg, I'm back there, in the river, with the dead staring at me, waiting for me to understand something I can never fully comprehend. Why? Why choose that? Why that place? Why I had to be the one to find him? There are no answers, only the trauma, and the certainty that I will never, ever be able to cross a river without thinking about what might be waiting beneath the surface, watching me, with eyes that never close. Hello, Mr. Horror. I don't usually talk about this. In fact, I don't even know if I want my name to appear, but after listening to some of the stories on your channel, I thought that maybe telling mine would help me sleep without waking up in a sweat at 3 in the morning. This happened to me 3 years ago in a wooded area in northern Oregon near Lake Clatsop. I used to go camping alone. It was a way to disconnect from work and everything around me. That time, I had planned a quiet weekend, just my tent, a flashlight, some canned food, and my old pickup truck. Everything was going well until the storm hit without warning. I remembered the sound first, a low hum, as if the forest was breathing before the thunder, then the wind, bending the trees and causing the branches to bang against my tent. I tried to secure the stakes, but the ground was already muddy and water was starting to seep through the seams. I took out my flashlight, the only one I had, and looked for somewhere to take shelter. The camp map showed an old cabin in a clearing less than a kilometer away. It wasn't listed as accommodation, but rather as an old landmark. At that moment, I didn't care. I just wanted a roof over my head and some warmth. The trail was a mixture of mud and roots. Lightning illuminated the trees for seconds at a time, making them look like giant skeletons before returning to darkness. The air smelled of wet earth and metal. I was cold, and every step I took made me think that something, I don't know what, was watching me from the forest. After about 20 minutes, I saw it. A small cabin, almost hidden among the pine trees with peeling paint and a door hanging on a single hinge. The flashlight illuminated a broken window and a porch covered with leaves. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I asked, even though I knew no one would answer. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me immediately. Dampness, rotten wood, and something else. Something sour, metallic. I went inside, turned on my flashlight, and the beam of light cut through the dust in the air as if it were fog. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years. There was a broken table, an overturned chair, and a rusty stove. The roof was leaking. My hands were shaking, but I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. It was just an old cabin. Then I heard it. A creak. Upstairs. I stood still, holding my breath. It could be the wind, I told myself, or an animal. But the footsteps repeated, slow, heavy, with a kind of shuffling, as if someone were limping. My heart was beating so loudly that I could have sworn the noise filled the room. I turned the flashlight toward the stairs. That's when I saw the stains. On the steps, right where the wood was darkened by moisture, there were footprints. Not very big, but recent. They were red, and they glistened as if they were still wet. I didn't think. I just went up. Each step creaked like a gunshot in the silence. The flashlight trembled in my hand. The smell grew stronger. Blood, no doubt, mixed with something rancid, like old meat. The second-floor hallway was covered in dust, except for a line of footprints leading to a half-open door. I approached. I pushed it open with my fingertips. Inside, there was a mattress on the floor covered with a stained sheet. Above the mattress, some chains hung from the wall, and on the floor around it, there were photographs pinned down with knives. Photos of people, young people, campers. Some were smiling, others clearly not. I recognized one of the faces, a girl from a poster I had seen at the gas station weeks ago, missing since June. I felt the air leave my lungs. I stumbled backward, tripping over a metal box at the foot of the mattress. The flashlight fell and rolled, leaving the beam pointing at the wall. And there, I saw it. There was a map of the forest, with areas marked in red ink. My camp was there, surrounded by a circle. I froze. The thunder rumbled so loudly that it made the windows rattle. And just then, from below, I heard the front door creak. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just threw myself down the stairs, stumbling, bumping into the walls. The flashlight went out. Everything was darkness. The wind was coming in through the cracks. The sound of the door was still in my head, as if I could still hear it opening over and over again. I reached the entrance and pulled on the handle. It didn't move. It was stuck. I pushed, hit, kicked. Nothing. Sweat ran down my face, mixed with the rainwater coming in through the roof. Thunder drowned out my screams. At that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. And what terrified me most was not hearing footsteps behind me, but smelling the scent. That smell of iron, sweat, earth. The smell of someone who had been there for a long time. I turned around, and in the fleeting reflection of a flash of lightning, I saw something move in the doorway of the upper hallway. A silhouette, tall, motionless, staring at me. I ran. I don't remember how, but I managed to break the side window. Glass cut my arm. The noise was deafening. I jumped into the mud, rolled over, and got up unsteadily. I didn't look back. I just ran into the forest. The sound of my footsteps mixed with the thunder. I ran until I felt like my lungs were going to burst. And yet, I could swear I heard chains rattling in the distance. When I made it out of the woods, I had no idea how much time had passed. The storm had calmed down, though a fine drizzle was still falling. My hands were shaking, covered in blood and mud. I'd lost my flashlight. My phone had gotten soaked in the fall, and all I had was the camp's digital clock. It read 3:17 a.m. I walked along the gravel path that led to the highway. Every shadow between the trees made me turn my head. I knew that someone was watching me. I didn't run. I couldn't. I had a cut on my leg, and every step hurt. But fear kept me, moving. When I finally saw the lights of the first building, I almost cried. It was an old gas station, the kind that seems to operate out of habit rather than for customers. The marquee flashed a blue neon sign that said, "Open." I pushed the door, and the bell rang. The guy behind the counter, a bald man in a flannel shirt with a cup of coffee in his hand, looked me up and down with a frightened expression. "God, what happened to you?" he asked, putting down his cup. "There's someone out there in the woods." My voice was shaking so much that even I couldn't understand myself. "A cabin. There are photos, chains. Someone lives there." He frowned, confused. "What cabin?" "Near the lake, on the North Trail. There's blood, there are things." I didn't finish. The guy was already shaking his head. "There's no cabin out there, buddy. That area's been closed for years." "I'm telling you there is." I slammed my hand on the counter. I saw photos of missing people. I saw footprints. The man fell silent. Then he picked up the phone on the wall and said he was going to call the county police. He left me sitting in a plastic chair by the window. Outside, the rain was hitting the asphalt with a hypnotic rhythm. I tried to control my breathing, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos nailed to the wood. There was one in particular, a girl with blonde hair, a big smile, and a yellow t-shirt that I couldn't get out of my head. A patrol car arrived 15 minutes later. 2 officers got out, one of them young, looking like he hadn't slept, and the other older, with a mustache and a tired look. The young man took notes while I spoke. I told him everything: the storm, the destroyed store, the cabin, the footprints, the chains, the photos, the map with my campsite marked. When I finished, the older cop stared at me. "Did you take anything tonight, sir?" I glared at him. "Are you fucking with me?" The young cop quickly intervened. "We can go check the place out, Sergeant. It's within our jurisdiction." The older cop sighed. "Fine, but if it turns out to be another one of those abandoned hunting cabins, I don't want to waste any more time." We returned in the patrol car. The road was slippery, the windshield covered with raindrops that the rain couldn't quite wash away. When we reached the turnoff, I showed them the trail. Everything looked different in the gray morning light that was beginning to dawn. The problem was that when we reached the clearing, the cabin wasn't there, no trace of it. No broken boards, no porch, not even the window through which he had escaped. Just a piece of sunken ground and puddles of murky water. "It was here," I insisted, pointing to the exact spot. "It was here." The police officers looked at each other. The young man turned on a flashlight and walked around a bit, looking for footprints or pieces of wood. The old man crossed his arms. "Look, sir, the forest changes a lot with the rain. Maybe you got disoriented." "No," I shouted, frustrated. "I saw things, do you understand? Chains, photos, a map with my store marked on it." The young man returned with an uncomfortable look on his face. "Sergeant, I found this." It was a sheet of paper, soggy and dirty. It was barely legible, but when he stretched it out, I saw red lines and I recognized it immediately. It was the map. My camp was still marked on it. The sergeant looked at the paper and frowned. It could be from a hunter or some kind of cartographer. That doesn't explain the chains or the photos. "And where are these photos, sir?" he asked skeptically. Because without evidence, this just sounds like a story poorly remembered due to fear. I didn't know how to respond. My head was a whirlwind of images, smells, and sounds. The metallic smell, the red footprints, the door opening. It was all so real. Finally, they took me to town and recommended that I rest and have something hot to drink. The young police officer gave me his card before leaving. "Call me if you remember anything else," he said. His name was Deputy Owen Langley. I spent the rest of the day in a cheap motel, unable to sleep. Every noise in the hallway made me jump. I showered 3 times, but I couldn't get the smell of rotten wood off me. In the evening, I turned on the TV, and while looking for something to distract me, a local news story came on. The case of Sarah Whitmore, a young woman who disappeared in 2018, has been reopened. New clues point to the northern area of Lake Clatsop. It was her, the girl in the photo, the one on the poster, the one in the cabin. I turned off the TV. I felt a chill run down my spine. What if that cabin hadn't disappeared? What if someone had moved it, dismantled it, hidden it? Someone who knew it had been there. That night, I dreamed of the door without a doorknob, of footsteps coming down the stairs, and of a flashlight flickering just before going out. When I woke up, the motel window was open, and on the table where I had left the policeman's card, someone had placed a new sheet of paper. It was another map, this time with the motel marked on it. I didn't sleep that night. The sound of the wind hitting the windows, the squeaking of the motel sign outside, and the echo of my own thoughts formed a symphony of paranoia. I looked at the new map on the table. It was hand-drawn with the same shaky lines I remembered seeing in the cabin. The red ink was identical, only this time the circle wasn't over the forest. It was over the Red Pine Motel, where I was staying. I swallowed hard. My hands were cold. There was no doubt about it. Someone had followed me. I went to the front desk. The clerk, a guy in his 20s, was chewing gum without really looking at me. "Did anyone ask for me last night?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He shook his head, but I noticed a hesitation. "No, sir. No one." He was lying. I could see it in his eyes and the way he avoided my gaze. "If anyone comes, don't tell them I'm here." I left $20 on the counter. "Okay?" He nodded quickly, nervously putting the bill away. I went back to the room and started packing. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay. As I closed my suitcase, I heard a car engine outside. I peeked through the curtain. A black pickup truck was parked in front of the motel, its engine running and its lights off. A silhouette remained motionless behind the wheel. I turned off the light. My heart was pounding in my chest. Minutes passed that felt like an eternity. The truck was still there, until finally I saw a cigarette being lit inside, the orange glow illuminating a barely visible face. It was the guy from the woods. I'm sure of it. The same one who had left the footprints. I took a deep breath and went out the back door, down the motel service corridor. I walked to the other end of the parking lot and disappeared into the trees. I was carrying only my backpack, my flashlight, and the purest fear I had ever felt in my life. I walked for almost an hour until I reached the center of town. It was small with only 2 main streets. I found an open coffee shop and went inside looking for shelter. I ordered coffee even though I couldn't taste anything. I just needed a place to think. At a nearby table, an elderly woman was leafing through the local newspaper. On the front page, I recognized a face. That of Deputy Langley, the young police officer who had gone with me to the woods. The headline read, "Local officer under investigation for misconduct in Whitmore case." My blood ran cold. I asked the woman for the newspaper and began to read. The article mentioned that Langley had been investigated for leaking confidential information about missing women and that he had been in contact with the victims' families outside of official channels. The article didn't say much else, but I understood enough. Langley was connected to all of this in some way. I picked up the payphone outside the cafe and dialed the sheriff's office. When a voice answered, I asked for the sergeant in charge of the case. "Langley," said the voice. "Langley is suspended, sir." "Do you know where he is?" "No." "Who's calling?" I hung up without answering. I decided to go to the town library. If there was an open case, there had to be records. The librarian, a quiet woman with thick glasses, let me into the local archives. I looked for clippings, news stories, anything about the Whitmore case or people missing near Lake Clatsop. I found more than I expected. There had been 6 cases in the last 15 years, all young people, all campers or backpackers, all missing in the same area. Only once was a body found, more than a decade ago, and the cause of death was never determined. But what made my blood run cold was a black and white archive photograph of an old cabin with a faded sign on the door, Dr. C. Langley Therapy and Retreat. It was the same structure, the same location, and the last name, Langley. I felt the air leave me. Was it possible that the young police officer was a descendant, or even the son of that doctor? Had he inherited the cabin, the obsession, the perversion? My heart was pounding in my chest. I took a copy of the clipping and left. But when I opened the door to leave the library, I saw something that paralyzed me. Outside, parked by the curb, was the same black van from the motel. This time, it was empty. The engine was off, but on the windshield, under the wiper, was a folded piece of paper. I crossed the street slowly, my pulse in my throat. I took out the paper and opened it. It had only 2 words written on it, in the same red ink as the map. "You shouldn't have come back." I don't remember how I got back to the motel. My body was shaking so much that I could barely hold the key. Inside the room, everything was in disarray. My suitcase was open, my things were on the floor, the bed had been moved, and on the pillow, another piece of paper. It was a photo, taken from outside through my bedroom window. I was asleep. The date printed on it was that same morning. I stood there, staring at it, my throat dry. I felt something inside me break, as if an invisible string had been stretched to its limit. I couldn't stay any longer. I couldn't trust the police. I couldn't sleep. All I could do was run. I don't remember making the decision to flee. I just found myself driving. The map was still on the passenger seat, folded and crumpled, but I couldn't stop looking at it. The red line marked a path that wound from the village to the forest. Part of me knew I should go in the opposite direction, away from that place forever. But another darker, more desperate part wanted answers. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the need to understand who had been following me, who knew my every move, my haunts, my sleepless nights. Maybe it was guilt, or just plain madness. I drove for hours, until the pavement turned to dirt, then to a root-covered trail. The rain started again, light at first, then like needles on the windshield. I stopped the car and continued on foot, flashlight in hand, the wind whistling through the trees. The forest smelled the same as that night. Dampness, mud, and something else. Something rancid like old meat. I walked on until the light from the flashlight illuminated a silhouette that made me stop. It was the cabin. Again. The roof had collapsed, the windows were covered with rotten boards. The door was crooked, but it was the same one. The same place that had haunted my dreams for weeks. I pushed the door open and went inside. The air was stale. On the floor, there were still pieces of rusty chains and the mattress was covered with mold. But there was something new. On a table perfectly arranged were my personal belongings. The flashlight I had lost that night, the scarf I left at the motel, even a cup from the coffee I had drunk at the village cafe. Everything was clean, arranged with sickening precision. I didn't understand anything. How had they gotten there? Who had put them there? I heard a noise behind me, the creak of a floorboard, the faint sound of breathing. I turned around, flashlight raised, trembling. And there he was, standing in the darkness, the man from the truck. I could make out his silhouette, the metallic glint of something he was holding in his hand. "Why are you following me?" I managed to say, my voice breaking. The man didn't answer. He just took a step forward, and at that moment, the flashlight trembled in my hands. "Who are you?" I shouted. Then he spoke, and his voice was softer than I expected. "You entered my house," he said. "It was an abandoned cabin," I replied. "It wasn't abandoned. It was just waiting." He paused. "Now you know too much." I tried to back away, but my feet sank into the damp ground. He raised his arm, and the metal glinted again. But before he could do anything, a gust of wind blew the door open, and the flashlight went out. Total darkness. All I could hear was my breathing and his. Groping my way forward, I moved toward the wall, looking for a way out. I touched wood, dust, and suddenly, paper. Photos. I ran my hand over them and recognized the faces. People who had disappeared. The same images I had seen pinned up in the attic that night. Only now, there was a new photo in the center. It was me, taken from behind, walking toward the cabin. That same night, panic paralyzed me. I heard a step, then another. I turned toward the door, ran, bumped into something, felt a hand on my coat pulling me. I managed to break free, fell to my knees, and without looking back, I ran out into the rain. I don't know how I got to the car. I only remember the branches hitting my face, my heart exploding in my chest. I started the engine and drove without lights, aimlessly, until I saw the highway again. I drove until dawn. It's been 3 years since that night. I never went back to that town, or to that forest. The police didn't believe me when I told them about the man, or when I handed over the photos. They said I had probably imagined it, that trauma and lack of sleep could cause confusion. I moved out of state, changed my phone number, my job, everything. But sometimes when I get home, I find something small on the table. A stone from the forest, a dry leaf, a coffee cup I don't remember buying. Nothing else, just that. It could be a coincidence, it might not be. And even though I try to convince myself that I'm safe, I still dream about the sound of chains rattling in the attic, the smell of rust, that calm voice saying, "I was just waiting." Sometimes I think about going back, just to check if the cabin is still there, or to make sure it isn't. But then I remember that last photo, the one showing me walking towards the cabin. and every time I do, I feel certain that someone is still watching me, waiting. Imagine this. You're alone in the Congo jungle, camera in hand, chasing the dream of photos that will change the world. But one mistake takes you too deep, and suddenly, you're not the hunter. You're the prey. There are no ghosts here, just men, and their hunger. My name is Kevin Hargrove. I'm 35 years old, a freelance photographer from Seattle, the kind of man who lives on black coffee and pixelated dreams, jumping from one contract to another for magazines that pay fair for views that last a month on the web. I photographed glaciers in Alaska, chaotic markets in Morocco, but nothing prepared me for the Congo. The deep jungle of the Democratic Republic of Congo, that green lung of the world that breathes humidity and secrets. I arrived in June 2025, flying into Kinshasa with a backpack full of gear, Canon EOS R5, lenses that cost me my last paycheck, extra batteries, and a GPS map I swore I wouldn't need. A solo photo expedition, I told my editor on Zoom. Authentic images of indigenous life, no guides. That sells. The border town of Lisala was my gateway to hell. I disembarked from a rickety flight at a red dirt airstrip, the air already thick as soup, heavy with diesel and wet earth. The midday sun hit me like a fist, and the locals, women with babies strapped to their backs, men in threadbare t-shirts, stared at me like I was some kind of freak. I rented a motorized canoe from a fisherman named Mobo, a skinny guy with beetle-stained teeth and eyes that glowed with unspoken warnings. Mr. Kevin, the Congo River, it eats men, tribes in the shadows. Don't go alone. Wait for the guide from Kisangani. I laughed, patting his bony shoulder. Mobo, I'm a photographer, not a tourist. I'll capture the beauty, not the danger. I gave him a wad of Congolese francs, more than it was worth, ignoring the villagers whispering, "Crazy Muzung, the jungle doesn't give back what it takes." Foreshadowing, I suppose, but enthusiasm was stronger. I climbed into the canoe, its motor roaring like a wounded animal, and launched myself onto the main river, camera hanging around my neck, the green horizon swallowing me whole. The canoe trip lasted 3 days, a slow purgatory down the wide brown Congo, flanked by walls of jungle that closed in like jaws. The heat was an invisible veil, a constant 38 degrees Celsius, 90% humidity. My shirt stuck to my skin like a second epidermis soaked in salty sweat. The buzzing of mosquitoes was an infernal symphony, black clouds descending at dusk, biting exposed legs and arms until the skin swelled into red welts that stung like fire. I paddled when the engine failed, which it did every hour, cheap fuel evaporating like promises, arms burning, back arched over the splintered wooden bench. The smell. God, the smell was the worst. Sweet rot of decaying vegetation floating on rafts of dead leaves, hippopotamus excrement emerging from the water like living rocks, growling threats, and underneath, the metallic stench of the river itself, laden with sediment and something darker like diluted blood. I ate what I could, stale energy bars that crumbled into wet crumbs, water from my canteen that tasted like hot plastic. Hunger set in on the second day, a gnawing emptiness in my stomach that made me see double on the river bends. Thirst was worse. The Congo looked drinkable, but Mobo had warned of bilharzia and cholera. Drink and you die slowly, Muzungu. So I rationed, my cracked lips bleeding when I bit them. The jungle was not the paradise of National Geographic. It was a living, hostile organism. Howler monkeys screamed from the treetops, their cries like lost souls. Birds with curved beaks squawked, wings cutting through the humid air. But at night, anchored in a hidden bend, paranoia grew. The wind in the leaves sounded like stealthy footsteps, soft crackles, branches snapping like bones. Animals. I would say to myself, flashlight sweeping the black shore, an alligator perhaps, red eyes floating like embers, or forest elephants stomping under the weight of their gray bodies. But then, on the third day, I heard something new. Distant at first, a rhythmic chant, low and guttural, like drums muffled by distance. Human voices, multiple, rising in a chorus that was not joyful. Howls. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. "Tribes," I murmured, stopping the canoe in a narrow tributary. The GPS was flickering, weak signal, and in my fatal mistake, I turned east, thinking it would shorten the route to a clearing marked on the map. The river narrowed, mangroves closing in, the current faster. Hours later, the engine coughed its last breath, and I was stranded on a muddy beach, pure jungle before me. Just a kilometer on foot, I lied to my reflection in the murky water. I slung my backpack over my shoulder, camera protected in a waterproof bag, machete in hand, and ventured in. Mistake number 2. The deep jungle was a green labyrinth, a tunnel of twisted trunks and vines hanging like sleeping snakes. The heat here was worse. Without the river, the air was stagnant, a steam oven that stole my breath with every step. Insects, soldier ants and black columns, gnats that got into my ears and nose, covered me like a second skin, bites swelling with pus. The smell of rot intensified, fungi decaying on fallen logs, carnivorous flowers exhaling false sweetness, and beneath, the earth itself, black mud that sucked boots up to the ankles. I sweated rivers, salt stinging my eyes, vision blurred. Hunger now a constant roar. I devoured a bar, but the emptiness persisted. Weakness in my knees. Thirst. I found a shady puddle, stagnant water with dancing larvae, but I drank, desperate, the taste of earth and death going down my throat. The machete cut through foliage, leaves as wide as plates, thorns that tore my skin, but I lost my bearings. The GPS, dead battery. The sun filtered through mottled rays played tricks. Shadows that looked like crouching figures. A distant roar that could be a lion or a storm. Genuine paranoia set in at dusk. The tribal chants returned, closer, bouncing off the canopy like echoes of a ritual. They weren't birds. Hoarse voices. The percussion of hollow sticks. A howl that made my hair stand on end. Healers. Hunters. I crouched behind a rotten log, my heart pounding, cold sweat dripping down my back. I imagined eyes in the darkness. Not beasts, but men. Men with bows. Men who don't want visitors. The ambush came at dusk, when the sky was turning purple and the shadows were melting into black. I was crossing a muddy clearing. Mistake, always a mistake. Machete raised against the vines, when I heard the snap. No time to turn. A raw fiber lasso closed around my ankle, pulling hard and throwing me face first into the mud, camera flying into the dirt. Guttural cries erupted. 5 figures emerged from the undergrowth, slender bodies painted with red mud and white ash, tribal stripes accentuating taut muscles. Not fierce caricatures, but real men, aged 30 to 40, eyes hardened by the fatigue of survival. Hardwood spears, sharpened with stones, tips smeared with something viscous. Frog poison, I learned later. Ferocious but human expressions, lips pursed in growls, eyebrows arched in ancestral distrust. Not demons, hunters. They dragged me away, ropes biting into my wrists, kicks to my ribs that knocked the air out of my lungs. "Please, friend, photographer," I shouted in English, then in clumsy French, learned from apps. Nothing. A blow with the handle of a spear to my temple, and the world went red. I woke up tied to a central pole in their hidden village, a smoky clearing in the heart of the jungle. Palm leaf and mud huts clustered like eggs in a nest, a central fire crackling loudly. About 50 inhabitants, women with children on their hips, elders sitting on logs, all staring at me with hostile curiosity. The tribe, Mbuti, or something similar, isolated in these depths, guardians of rivers that no one maps, was not like in the movies. They were survivors, dark skin marked by scars from scurvy and bites, jewelry made from antelope bones, a rapid dialect that sounded like clicks and grunts. But the horror was their ritual. I had been captured by mistake, I later learned from a ranger. Mistaken for an illegal bushmeat hunter, one of those bastards who decimate elephants for their tusks. Tribal revenge. In these areas, eating the enemy restores balance, an echo of past wars against invaders, not myths, raw history. The chief, a 50-year-old man, his torso scarred like a battle map, wearing a necklace of human teeth, approached with a blunt obsidian knife, his eyes fixed on me as if measuring meat. They marked me, shallow incisions on my chest and arms, blood spurting in fine lines that burned like acid. They smeared crushed herbs, a green paste that smelled like stale mint and burned like primitive disinfectant, to purify their prey. My stomach churned. Panic was a knot in my throat, cold sweat soaking what was left of my clothes. My heart was beating so hard that the pole vibrated, a drum in my ears that drowned out their songs. I heard the ritual, tight leather drums, voices rising in a hymn of contained fury. I saw the preparation. At the edge of the clearing, 2 warriors were skinning a captured monkey. No, worse. The remains of a man, perhaps a previous hunter, his torso opened like ripe fruit, pink flesh exposed to the fire. The smell hit me. Fresh blood, metallic and warm, mixed with the smoke of damp wood and the acrid sweat of crowded bodies. Meat roasting on skewers, sizzling fat splattering flames, the sweet smell of burnt protein that made me vomit bile on the ground. "No, please God, no!" I roared in English, fighting against the fibers cutting into my skin, calculating impossible escapes. The post sunk in mud, guards with spears 3 meters away, black jungle beyond. I imagined the knife sinking in, my skin tearing like paper, the feast beginning with my entrails. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks. I urinated in my pants, humiliating heat spreading. They were human, yes. A young warrior hesitated for a second, his eyes meeting mine in fleeting pity. But tribal hunger was stronger. The chief raised the knife, chants reaching a crescendo, and I knew this was the end. Chaos saved my life, just as the blade grazed my shoulder, a preliminary cut testing flesh. A scream tore through the night. From the edge of the clearing, 2 warriors burst in fighting, fists flying in a quarrel over spoils. A rifle confiscated from my backpack, perhaps, or old grudges from a failed hunt. The chief turned, barking orders, and the village erupted. Women screaming, children fleeing, guards distracted. In the panic, the knot around my wrists loosened, fibers damp with my sweat. I pulled, skin tearing, blood lubricating. I rolled off the pole, landing in mud, and ran. I didn't look back. The jungle swallowed me. Branches whipping my face, thorns gouging my legs, lungs burning with thick air. Wounds bled, herb paste burning like live fire. Hunger and thirst a blur. I ran for hours, or minutes, time lost in darkness, haunted by echoes of tribal screams merging with monkey howls. I stumbled over roots, rolling down slopes that bruised my ribs, my vision clouded by tears and sweat. Keep going. Just keep going. Dawn found me dehydrated, on the edge of a stream, drinking murky water until I vomited. Rescue arrived at noon. Virunga Rangers, patrolling on rumors of hunters. A motorboat purred downstream, voices in Swahili. "Muzungu, are you alive?" I collapsed into their arms, babbling my story, camera miraculously intact in my backpack, lenses fogged with mud. They took me to a medical post in Butembo, bandages on cuts, antibiotics for incipient infections, therapy that would not erase the scars. The tribe, they didn't pursue them. "They are ancient guardians," said the head ranger, a man named Kasongo with scars of his own. "They mistook you for a bracketeer. They eat enemies to avenge the land, not evil, survival." Bitter twist. Me, innocent photographer, almost turned into a meal because of a misunderstanding. But the trauma, that doesn't go away. Months have passed. I'm in Seattle, gray rain against my window, editing photos from the Congo, glistening leaves, winding rivers that no one will publish, too raw. But at night the smell returns, blood and smoke, sizzling flesh. I hear the chants, feel the knife grazing skin. My heart races, cold sweat soaking the sheets. I no longer travel alone. I no longer travel. The jungle gave me back, but it took pieces. And in the silence I whisper, "Don't go deep. Beauty bites." It's not a soft echo. It's guttural, as if someone were drowning a live animal in their own throat. I sit up in bed, sheets sticking to my sweaty skin, and for a second I think I'm back there. Cold sand beneath my bare feet, salt burning my eyes, the Black Sea lapping at the shore like a hungry tongue. My name is Elias Hawthorne. Elias, with that drawn-out S that my grandfather from Salem insisted on pronouncing like a broken spell. And in the summer of 2019, when I was 26 and life seemed like a blank canvas to paint madness on, I decided that a beach camp with friends would be the cure for my weary soul. It was the beginning of a nightmare that still digs its nails into my chest. If you're listening to this on YouTube, with your warm light and your safe phone, remember, terror doesn't always come with fangs. Sometimes, it's just a man in the dark, and you, the idiot who runs toward him. It all started with a stupid idea, born of cheap beer and youthful promises. I was working as a barista at an indie rock coffee shop in downtown Portland at the time, the kind of place where hipsters order lattes with oat milk and advice on finding their center. And my friends were a bunch of lost souls like me, people in their 20s who pretended that adulthood was optional. There was Jethro Quill, my roommate, a 27-year-old mechanic with gear tattoos on his arms and a laugh that rumbled like an old engine. Cressida Lorne, 25, a freelance graphic artist with electric blue-dyed hair and a tendency to collect shells as if they were sacred relics. And Torrin Beecham, the joker of the group, 28, a failed surfer from Newport with perpetual freckles and jokes that hid his own loneliness. We met at a Halloween party in 2017, me dressed as a drowned sailor, ironic now, and since then, we were that gang that planned getaways to reconnect with nature. Cannon Beach, Jethro proposed one June night, raising his can of PBR like a totem. Bonfires, stars, and zero cell service so our bosses can't screw with us. I nodded, ignoring the knot in my stomach. Northern Oregon, wild coast, gray sand beaches dotted with basalt rocks like sunken giant fingers. Fog rolling in from the Pacific like the breath of a sleeping dragon. It sounded idyllic, but deep down I already felt the weight. Life had been gnawing at me. A fresh divorce from a girlfriend named Maribel, who left me for a guy with stability, and nights alone counting cracks in the ceiling. We arrived on a Friday at sunset, the sun sinking into the horizon like an open wound, staining the sky blood red. We rented an old Chevy Suburban from Jethro. The engine coughed like a chronic smoker, loaded with green canvas tents, coolers full of beer and marshmallows, and my acoustic guitar that never played right. The drive along US 101 was a wet dream. Tall pine trees flanking the highway like sentinels. Views of the ocean dotted with waves breaking into white crests, and that salty smell that gets into your lungs like an addiction. But as we approached Cannon Beach, the fog arrived first. A gray veil devouring the landscape, streetlights blinking like tired eyes. We parked in the Ecola State Park parking lot, paid the camping fee, $20 a night, a steal, and carried our gear up a gravel path that crunched under our boots. The campground was a semi-hidden clearing among rolling dunes, 4 numbered sites with circular stone fire pits, portable toilets 200 meters away that smelled of stale disinfectant, and the beach just a short, sandy descent away. "Home sweet home!" Torrin shouted, throwing his backpack into the air. We set up our tents in efficient silence, mine, a 2-person dome that always seemed too big for one, and lit the campfire with branches gathered along the way. The crackling of the damp wood was soothing, sparks rising like shooting stars, smoke stinging our eyes but keeping mosquitoes away. That first night was light, almost therapeutic. We roasted hot dogs on sharpened sticks, the juice dripping into the flames with hisses that sounded like laughter. Jethro told stories from his workshop, A customer who swore his Ford had spirits because the engine would shut off on its own. Collective laughter, but I saw the ghost in his eyes, that of his father, who died in a car accident when he was 15. Cressida drew in her sketchbook by the light of the fire, silhouettes of haystack rocks emerging from the sea like petrified whales, her pencil tearing through the paper with feverish urgency. Torin, true to form, pulled out a bottle of cheap tequila and challenged us to shots, to the waves that cleanse our souls. I drank, the liquid burning like regret, and for a moment the knot in my chest loosened. We talked about broken dreams. I confessed my panic at turning 30 with nothing to show for it, a portfolio of travel photos that no one would buy. Cressida admitted that her art was silent screams on canvas. But beneath the laughter, there were shadows. A sign at the visitor center, which we passed by ignoring. Warning: nighttime assaults on isolated beaches, reported incidents of harassment, stay in groups. Torin read it aloud, mockingly. Great beach vampires. We laughed, but the tequila didn't erase the chill. The fog thickened around 10 p.m., enveloping the camp in a white shroud that muffled the sounds, waves breaking in the distance like the whispers of secret lovers, an owl hooting from the pines like a forgotten lament. We crawled into our tents early, exhausted from the trip, the sea lulling us with its hypnotic rhythm. I curled up in my sleeping bag, the zipper creaking like a secret, and for the first time in months, I slept without nightmares. Or so I thought. On the second night, terror began to weave itself subtly. We woke up with a slight hangover, heads throbbing like distant drums, and spent the day exploring. We went down to the beach at dawn, cold sand compacted under our feet, waves lapping at our ankles with water that bit like salted ice. Haystack Rock stood imposingly, a 235-foot monolith covered with barnacles and seagulls screeching like souls in torment. Cressida took photos with her cell phone for my Insta ephemeral art, while Jethro and Torin played frisbee, the disc flying in erratic arcs that ended in the sea. I walked alone along the shore, picking up pieces of driftwood carried by Atlantic currents. The Pacific is treacherous, bringing treasures from distant storms, feeling the sand sinking between my fingers, like time slipping away. But the tension grew with the sun. At noon, in a beach cafe in Seaside, a 10-minute drive away, we heard local rumors. A waitress with a hillbilly accent and sunken eyes murmured about a madman on the loose in the dunes. 2 weeks ago, a girl alone. They found her screaming, bruised. She says some guy dragged her into the water thinking she was, easy prey. Jethro paled, his hand clenching his fork like a weapon. Shit, what about the police? She shrugged. They patrol, but this coast is big. Long nights. Torin joked. Then we'll take turns keeping watch, like Boy Scouts. But his laughter sounded hollow, and on the way back, the silence in the Suburban was heavy, fog rolling in through the windows like curious fingers. That afternoon, paranoia settled like fog in my chest. We returned to camp, lit the fire early against the cold coming in from the ocean, temperatures dropping to 50 degrees Fahrenheit at sunset, salty wind lashing the tents like invisible whips. We grilled sausages again, but our appetites were gone. I ate mechanically, smoke stinging my throat, eyes scanning the shadows between the dunes. Cressida tried to break the ice. Look, the constellations are coming out early, but the stars were veiled by low clouds and each breaking wave sounded like a threatening whisper. Come closer. Jethro suggested a card game, gin rummy by lantern light, but our hands were shaking, and I lost round after round, my mind wandering to dark scenarios. What if the madman was lurking now, a silhouette in the fog, his eyes fixed on our campfire, like moths drawn to light? Torin, always the clown, told a story about local ghost, the ghost of Tillamook Rock, a lighthouse haunted by the souls of shipwreck victims, but he stopped abruptly when Cressida turned pale. Don't mess around, Tor. That's the last thing we need. We crawled into our tents at 9 p.m., flashlights turned off to save battery, but sleep was fragmented. I heard noises, branches creaking in the wind, or footsteps, a distant splash on the beach, waves, or someone shuffling their feet. I tossed and turned in my sleeping bag, cold sweat sticking my hair to my forehead, my heart beating an irregular rhythm that drowned out the sea. It's just paranoia, I told myself, but the knot in my stomach said otherwise. I dreamed of black water closing in over my head, invisible hands pulling at my ankles, and I woke up gasping, the tent zipper creaking like a warning. The third night, the one that changed everything, was the culmination. We had planned an epic campfire, marshmallows toasted to golden brown, stories around the crackling fire, casting dancing shadows on the tent walls like actors in a macabre theater. The day had been tense. We explored the dunes to the north, loose sand sinking under our boots like living quicksand, and found fresh footprints, large men's boots, imprinted in the mud near a brackish stream. "Hunters," said Jethro, but his voice trembled. Cressida hugged herself. Or worse. Torrin tried to lighten the mood. Maybe Bigfoot looking for a girlfriend. But no one laughed. We returned early, barricading the site with extra branches around the perimeter, an illusion of security, and ate dinner in silence, tequila passing from hand to hand like a bitter balm. Around 11 p.m., the fog thickened to total opacity. The camp an island in a white sea. "Sleep with one eye open," Jethro murmured, his hunting rifle, a Remington inherited from his father, leaning against his tent. "Just in case." We parted with awkward hugs, promises that tomorrow will be better, and I crawled into my sleeping bag, flashlight within reach, improvised machete made from a sharp stick under my pillow. The sea lulled us, waves breaking in a hypnotic rhythm. Crash, pause, crash. I closed my eyes, but my sleep was shallow, a thin veil over an abyss. It was 2:37 a.m. when the scream pierced the silence. My phone, no signal, but the clock was working, dialed it later. But at that moment, time stood still. I was in that limbo between sleep and wakefulness, dreaming of Maribel laughing on an idyllic beach, when I heard it. A guttural scream, human to the core, torn from deep within the chest, like a knife sinking into flesh. It wasn't an animal. Coyotes howl high-pitched, seals bark hoarsely. It was pure desperation, a muffled gurgle, cut off abruptly, as if a hand covered the mouth. It came from the beach, maybe 100 yards downhill, bouncing off the fog like an evil echo. My heart exploded in my chest, a dull thud that knocked me out of my sleeping bag in seconds, bare feet stepping onto the cold canvas of the tent. "What the hell?" I whispered, my hand shaking as I grabbed the Maglite flashlight, a heavy cylinder I bought out of post-divorce paranoia. The scream repeated closer, a broken sob that made every hair on my body stand on end. "Help, for God's sake." Female, young, voice broken with terror. Adrenaline injected, tunnel vision, ears ringing, the world reduced to that sound. A drowning. An accident. But something in the tone, the underlying struggle, the irregular splashing, screamed human danger. I crawled out of the tent, the treacherous zipper creaking like a gunshot in the silence. The camp was a blur of shadows, inert tents, the campfire reduced to red embers that flickered like accusing eyes. "Jethro. Torrin," I whispered, but panic closed my throat. Nothing. My friend slept, exhausted by tequila and wind, oblivious to the horror descending. The third scream came then, higher pitched, a shriek that broke into a muffled moan followed by a heavy splash, like a body sinking. I didn't think. I ran, feet sinking into cold, wet sand, pebbles biting into soles like tiny teeth, flashlight sweeping the steep descent to the beach. The fog was thick soup, reducing visibility to 10 feet, my beam of light cutting white wisps like a knife through fog. Branches of coastal shrubs, prickly salal scratched my legs, tearing my pajama pants to shreds, warm blood dripping in the darkness. My heart pounded in my ears, a war drum drowning out everything else. What if it was a trap? The madman of the rumors, luring me in like bait. But the scream. God, that scream was a hook in my gut pulling me toward the abyss. I reached the shore, gasping for breath, waves lapping at my ankles with icy water that rose like an electric shock. 55 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to numb limbs in minutes. The beach stretched black and endless, basalt rocks scattered like ancient tombs, fog rolling over the sea surface like smoke from a shipwreck. I turned off my flashlight for a second. Predator instinct, not prey. My eyes adjusting to the veiled moon that painted everything in leaden gray. Another scream, straight ahead, maybe 50 yards away. A broken sob mixed with furious splashes. I ran parallel to the shore, sand flying in sprays under my feet, knees high against the undertow that pulled like drowning hands. Terror was a knot in my chest, tightening until it hurt. What if I was too late? What if it was too late? I imagined the worst. A woman alone, dragged away by a stranger, her life escaping in red bubbles in the black water. The salty wind whipped my face, involuntary tears mixing with sweat. And for a moment, I hesitated. Should I shout for help? Go back and wake the boys? But the next sound, a low, animalistic male growl followed by a slap of flesh against flesh, propelled me forward. "Here! I'm here!" I shouted, my hoarse voice betraying me, flashlight back on, dancing elongated shadows, dunes like hills of death, waves like open jaws. I was 20 yards away when I saw it. The scene materialized in the beam of light like a frame from a nightmare. A figure in the shallow water, up to their hips, fighting against the current. Not a clean drowning. It was pure, brutal struggle. She, a woman in her 30s, dark hair plastered to her face like seaweed, white t-shirt now translucent and torn, was thrashing with pale arms, splashing water in silvery arcs. Her eyes, when caught in the light, were wells of animal panic, dilated, pleading, fixed on me as if I were salvation and doom. But he... God, he was horror incarnate. A burly man, his silhouette, outlined against the sea, holding her by the hair with one gloved hand, a thick work glove, stained with sand, the other raised in a clenched fist that came down again and again, blows muffled by the water, but effective, his face contorted into a mask of blind rage. He wasn't a stranger. I saw the flash of recognition in his eyes when he saw me. A local, perhaps, with a scruffy beard and eyes bloodshot from alcohol or anger. "Let her go, you son of a bitch," I roared, fear turning to adrenaline-fueled rage, my legs pumping sand and water in a clumsy run. Time slowed then, each second a heartbeat of pure terror. Waves crashed over my knees, icy water rising to my thighs, numbing muscles, but not panic. He turned, releasing her for a second. She fell to her knees, in the surf, gasping, hands clawing at the sand, and looked at me. Fierce eyes, lips pursed in a snarl that showed yellowed teeth. "Who the hell are you?" he spat, his Northwest accent crumpled by the night, but he didn't wait for an answer. He lunged at me, splashing like an enraged bull, fist raised in an arc that cut through the fog. I hesitated. A fatal second. Survival instinct screaming, "Run!" But I saw his free hand reaching into his pocket. Knife. Rock. Terror paralyzed me. Cold sweat dripping down my back, stomach churning with nausea, the sea closing in around me like a living trap. She screamed again, "Please!" A sound that broke my soul, and I lunged. We collided in a tangle of limbs. My flashlight flying, light spinning wildly in white spirals. His fist connecting with my cheek, a dull thud that exploded red stars in my vision. Metallic blood filling my mouth. I fell backward into the water, a wave breaking over my head, salt and sand filling my nose, my lungs burning in drowning panic. I kicked, emerging coughing, and saw him looming over me, giant shadow, fist coming down again. But her scream, a primal shriek that cut through the fog like glass, distracted him. He turned, and in that blink I rolled, my hand finding a rock the size of my fist, sharp as vengeance. I raised it, striking his knee with a crack that sounded like wood splitting. He howled, staggering, and that was enough. "Run! Run!" I shouted to her, my voice broken, dragging myself to my feet in the undertow that pulled like anchors. She got up, staggering, legs trembling like a wounded deer, and ran toward the shore, sand splashing. He chased us one step, furious, splashing, guttural curses. "I'll find you, bitch. And your savior, too." But the pain in his legs slowed him down. I watched him flee, a limping silhouette toward the northern fog, disappearing into the dunes like a ghost dissipating. I collapsed to my knees in the sand, waves lapping at my wounds, my body trembling not from cold, but from a residual terror that drained my veins. She collapsed beside me, muffled sobs mingling with the sea, her arms wrapping around me in a desperate embrace. "Thank you, God." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, but her eyes, when I lifted them to the recovered light of the flashlight, were pure abyss. Frozen panic, the kind that cannot be erased with words. I carried her back to camp. Her name was Leora Voss, 29, a backpacker from Seattle who was camping alone half a mile south, drawn by the stars, half carrying her, my arms burning with fresh bruises. We woke the kids with screams. Jethro came out rifle in hand, sleepy eyes turning fierce. Torrin cursed, Cressida cried, hugging Leora. We called 911 from Jethro's phone, a miraculous signal on the hill, and the Cannon Beach police arrived in 20 minutes. Blue lights flashing in the fog like beacons of salvation. A burly officer named Harlan Fisk, taking statements with a flashlight in his hand. It was a nighttime assault. Leora had gone out for a walk under the moon. The guy, an ex from a neighboring town, drunk and obsessed, had been stalking her for days, dragging her into the water to talk. I interrupted his plan, saving her from forced drowning or worse. They patted me on the back. "Hero, Mr. Hawthorne." But deep down, the terror wouldn't go away. That night, huddled in Jethro's tent, I heard echoes, waves like muffled laughter, wind like whispers of vengeance. The aftermath was a whirlwind of shadows. The police escorted us to a motel in Seaside that same night. Abandoned tents, camp broken up like a shattered dream. And Leora spent the early morning trembling on my shoulder, confessing fragments. I saw him at the cafe yesterday. Eyes fixed, smile twisted. I thought it was paranoia. Jethro guarded the door with a loaded rifle. Torrin paced circles like a caged wolf. Cressida sketched the scene on crumpled napkins. My silhouette against the sea, fist raised. At dawn, witnesses. Bruises blooming on my cheek like purple flowers. Scratches on bleeding legs. Leora with tufts of hair pulled out and finger marks on her arms like bracelets of bruises. The guy, a certain Bram Lockwood, 34, with a history of domestic violence, was arrested that afternoon, limping in handcuffs, his gaze fixed on me from the patrol car. "I'll see you in your dreams, hero." A promise he kept. We drove back to Portland in silence, the Suburban roaring down 101 like a wounded animal. The victory felt hollow. Leora moved in with Cressida temporarily. Group therapy and sessions that smelled of stale coffee and unshed tears. Jethro became quieter, his laughter a memory. Torrin drowned his fears in waves. But I saw the tremor in his hands as he rowed. I became a ghost of my former self. Work at the coffee shop became a blur. I spilled lattes, saw her face in every customer's shadow. Nights alone, the apartment a mausoleum of silence, where every creak of the floor was a step on the beach. Every drip in the bathroom, a splash in the surf. Weekly nightmares, me running, but the water closing in. Hands pulling me down, his growl in my ear. "I'll find you." I'd wake up screaming, sheets soaked, and take pills that didn't ease the eternal knot in my chest. 3 years later, the trauma persists like salt in open wounds. Leora and I dated for a while. A connection born of horror, kisses that tasted of sand and tears, but it broke under the weight. "I can't sleep without hearing your scream, Elias." She moved to Boise, far from the sea. I stayed, but I avoid beaches. Cannon Beach is a cursed name. I drive by, windows closed, and the Pacific calls to me with waves that sound like invitations. Jethro married a school teacher, but his rifle sleeps under the bed. Torrin gave up surfing, works in a boat shop, eyes fixed on empty horizons. Cressida now exhibits her drawings. The Sinister Coast, gallery in the Alberta Arts District. But every stroke is a captured scream. And I tell this story because if I don't let it out, it drowns me. That scream saved me and broke me. It made me a hero to strangers, but a villain in my own mind. Why did you run? What if you had died? The terror wasn't the assault. It was the doubt, the what if, the echo that drags me back into the black water. If you camp on the beach, listen. But if you hear a scream, will you run or will you pray that someone else does? My name is Cove Winters. I'm 26 years old, and 3 summers ago I worked as a head counselor at Camp Whispering Pines, a remote summer camp in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. It was my 3rd year there, a position I had earned through experience and competence. I supervised 5 other counselors and was responsible for the safety of 32 children between the ages of 8 and 12 during 2-week sessions. The camp was located in an isolated valley, surrounded by dense forest in all directions. The nearest road was 5 miles away, the nearest town 20. We had a generator for limited electricity, a well for water, and essentially no connectivity. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, nothing except an emergency satellite phone that the director, a gruff man named Everest, kept locked in his office. The isolation was part of the appeal. Parents paid premium prices for an unplugged experience for their children. Pure nature, traditional camp activities, no digital distractions. For me, it was well-paid work in a beautiful setting, until it wasn't. I first saw the park ranger on the 2nd night of the first session, just after dark. I was doing my final rounds, checking that all the children's cabins were locked, that the fires were completely out, that all the equipment was put away. The camp settled into its nighttime silence, the chirping of crickets, the occasional owl, the whisper of wind in the pines. I saw him at the edge of the clearing where our camp met the forest, a figure in the characteristic ranger uniform, olive green shirt, cargo pants, wide-brimmed hat. He carried a flashlight that methodically swept the perimeter. "Hello," I called, approaching. The presence of a ranger was not unusual. The Forest Service patrolled the area regularly. He stopped, turned toward me. Even from 10 feet away, it was hard to see his face under his hat in the darkness. "Good evening," he said. His voice was deep, rough, as if he didn't use it much. "I'm Cove Winters, head monitor. Everything okay?" "Routine," he replied. "Just checking." "Checking what?" A long pause. "Camp security. We've had animal activity in the area, just making sure everything's secure." "What kind of animals?" "Bears, mainly. Some coyotes. Nothing alarming, but better safe than sorry." That made sense. Black bears were common in the Poconos. "We appreciate the vigilance. Need me to show you around the camp?" "Not necessary. I'm already familiar with it." His flashlight swept the perimeter again. "Continue with your evening. I'll be around." And with that, he walked away into the woods, his form disappearing among the trees. I thought little of it. The rangers did their job, I did mine. If he was concerned about bears, I was glad he was keeping watch. I saw him again the next night. Same time, just after dusk. Same place, more or less, walking the perimeter. This time I didn't approach him, just waved from a distance. He nodded in acknowledgement and continued his patrol. On the 3rd night, I mentioned it to Everest during the staff meeting. "That park ranger has been patrolling every night. Did you know about that?" Everest frowned. "What ranger?" "The one from the Forest Service. He says there's bear activity. He's been patrolling after dark." "Huh, they didn't mention anything to me." Everest shrugged. "Well, better that they're being vigilant. Keep an eye out anyway. If there are bears around, we need to secure all food properly." That night, when I saw the ranger again, I tried for another conversation. "Hey, excuse me, I never asked your name." He stopped, turned toward me. Again, his face was mostly obscured. "Thatcher," he said after a pause. "Ranger Thatcher. Nice to meet you. My director mentioned that he hadn't heard about any bear activity. When did it start?" "Last week, before the campers arrived." His flashlight swept over one of the children's cabins. "Is that cabin 3? "Yes, the 8 to 9-year-old girls." "Good to know." His flashlight lingered on the cabin a moment longer than necessary. Important to know where everyone is, for emergencies. Something in his tone, or maybe how his flashlight lingered, made me uncomfortable. "Sure, all the cabins are clearly marked." "Good. Good evening, Cove." He used my first name for the first time, and I didn't like how it sounded coming out of his mouth. The following nights established a pattern. Thatcher would show up just after dark, always on the perimeter, always patrolling. Sometimes I would see him from afar. Other times, he would approach briefly, exchanging a few words before continuing on, but I began to notice strange things. His uniform, though correct in style, seemed worn, faded, as if it were old or bought secondhand. I never saw him during the day, only after dark. His conversations were strange, questions about camp routines, how many children were in each cabin when the lights were turned off, and the way he looked at the cabins, that lingering, evaluative gaze that made something primitive in my brain scream warning. I tried talking to Everest again. "That ranger, Thatcher, did you talk to the Forest Service about him?" "Why would I? He's doing his job." "He just seems, I don't know, he's here every night. Isn't that weird?" Everest gave me a look that clearly said he thought I was being paranoid. "Cove, if the Forest Service wants to patrol, I let them patrol. It keeps us safe. Stop worrying so much." But I couldn't, because something felt wrong, deeply wrong. On the 6th night, one of the kids, a 9-year-old boy named Peregrine, came to me, scared. "Mr. Cove, there's a man watching our cabin." My heart raced. "What do you mean, watching?" "From the woods. He has a flashlight. He's been there for like 10 minutes, just watching." I ran outside. Sure enough, there was a flashlight at the edge of the woods, its beam fixed on cabin 5 where Peregrine slept. "Thatcher," I called, running toward the light. "What are you doing?" The flashlight went out immediately. By the time I reached the spot, there was no one there. Only darkness and trees. I searched with my own flashlight, calling his name. Nothing. He had vanished completely. I returned to the cabin. Peregrine was watching me from the window, still scared. "It's okay," I assured him, though I wasn't sure of anything. He was probably just checking something. Go back to bed. But that night, I did something I should have done before. I walked the entire perimeter of the camp, looking for signs of Thatcher. Not to talk, but to understand his patterns. Where he went, what he was really doing. I found him on the east side, standing completely still, staring at cabin 2, his flashlight off, just standing there in the dark, watching. "Thatcher," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned so abruptly that I almost dropped my flashlight. "I didn't hear you coming." "What are you doing?" "My job." "Your job isn't standing in the dark watching the kids' cabins." A long, tense silence. Then, "Just making sure everything's secure. Like I said, it's creepy. The kids are getting scared. The kids should be asleep." His tone had changed, colder, more defiant. "Look, I appreciate the vigilance, but you need to keep your distance from the cabins. If there's a legitimate security concern, talk to Everest first." "Sure." He turned on his flashlight, shining it directly in my face, blinding me. "Whatever you say." And he walked off into the woods, leaving me blinking dots of light out of my eyes. The next day, I finally convinced Everest to use the satellite phone to call the Forest Service. "Just to check," I insisted. "Just to make sure everything is legitimate." Everest grumbled, but made the call. I waited outside his office, my anxiety growing with each passing minute. When he came out, his face was pale. There is no Ranger Thatcher on the roster. In fact, there is no one assigned to actively patrol this area at all. The world stopped. What? They said they do occasional checks, but not daily. And they certainly don't have anyone named Thatcher. I described the guy, and they said no active Ranger matches. Horror set in, cold and complete. Then who the hell has been prowling around our camp every night? I don't know, but I'm calling the county police right now. The police said they would arrive in 2 hours. The camp was remote, the roads difficult at night. In the meantime, Everest and I decided to gather all the children in the dining hall, under constant supervision by all the counselors, safety in numbers. But I couldn't sit still. I needed answers. I needed to understand who this man was and what he wanted. I grabbed my most powerful flashlight and headed into the woods toward where Thatcher always disappeared. There had to be something there, a clue, a camp, something. I searched for 20 minutes, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, my breath heavy. And then I saw it. A small structure, barely visible among the trees. It wasn't an official Forest Service cabin. It was makeshift, made of scrap wood and tarp, deliberately hidden. My heart was pounding wildly as I approached. The door, just a sheet of wood on makeshift hinges, was ajar. "Thatcher," I called, my voice shaking. "Are you in there?" Silence. I pushed the door open. The interior smelled of dampness and something else, something chemical I couldn't identify. My flashlight swept the narrow space, and I saw. The walls were covered with Polaroid photos, dozens of them, hundreds, all of them of children from the camp, sleeping. Photos taken through cabin windows, close-up angles of faces on pillows, small bodies curled up in sleeping bags. Peregrine from Cabin 5, her mouth slightly open in sleep. A girl named Sparrow from Cabin 2, hugging a teddy bear. Photo after photo after photo. Some had dates written on the back, not just from this session, but from weeks before. Before we arrived, before the camp officially opened, he had been here, watching, waiting, documenting, and on the makeshift table in the center of the cabin, more photos. These were undeveloped, and a Polaroid camera, and a pair of binoculars, and flashlights, and notebooks filled with handwritten notes, schedules, names, routines for each child. My stomach churned. This wasn't surveillance. It was stalking, predation, planning for something that hadn't happened yet, but that he had clearly been considering. A sound behind me, a branch snapping. I turned, my flashlight catching a figure in the doorway. Thatcher. But now, without the hat, I could see his face completely. Middle-aged, unshaven, eyes that reflected my flashlight like an animal's. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice still gravelly but now without any pretense of professionalism. "What is all this?" My voice sounded stronger than I felt. "What the hell are you doing?" "Observing, documenting, waiting for the right moment." The right moment for what? A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. "Isn't it obvious?" Pure terror flooded me. I was alone in the woods with a predator who had been stalking children, and no one knew exactly where he was. My hand found my walkie-talkie. I ripped it from my belt, pressed the button. "Everest, I'm in the woods, east side. There's a cabin. This guy is..." Thatcher lunged at me. I dropped the walkie-talkie, turned, ran. Branches tore at my face. Roots tried to catch my feet. Behind me, I could hear him, chasing, gaining ground. "You can't hide in my forest," his voice boomed. "I know every inch of it." I ran faster than I knew I could, my flashlight bouncing wildly, creating crazed shadows. The camp lights were ahead, 50 feet, 40, 30. I burst out of the woods, into the clearing, screaming, "Help me! He's behind me!" Everest and 2 counselors came running out of the dining hall. Thatcher, if that was his real name, paused at the edge of the woods, assessing his chances. Then, seeing the 3 adults approaching, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. The police arrived an hour later. I led them to the cabin. The sheriff, An older man named Crispin looked at the photos with an increasingly sick expression. "This is enough for multiple charges," he said. "Stalking, trespassing, endangering the welfare of minors, if we ever catch him." But they didn't. Not that night. A thorough search of the woods found no trace of him. He had vanished, probably knowing the terrain well enough to evade the search. We evacuated the camp immediately. 32 terrified children and their exhausted counselors were sent home in the middle of the night. Angry and frightened parents arrived to pick up their children. The camp closed permanently 2 weeks later. No parent would send their children back after what had happened. Thatcher was eventually identified. His real name was Fenwick Crane, a 46-year-old man with a history of arrests for voyeurism and stalking. He had been living in the woods for months, watching the camp, waiting for his chance. He was caught 3 states away 2 months later. He is now serving 15 years. But the damage was done. To the children, to their families, to me. Because I had seen him almost every night. I had talked to him. I had believed he was who he said he was. And all the while he was at those windows, taking pictures, planning God knows what. I still wake up with nightmares. Not of him chasing me, though that's terrifying, but of all the nights I didn't stop him. All the times I could have investigated earlier, questioned more aggressively, protected those children better. The paranoia I felt, that gut feeling that something was wrong, had been right. But I didn't act on it quickly enough, and 32 children now live knowing that someone watched them while they slept. That's the real horror, not some supernatural monster, just a man, a human predator wearing the guise of authority to get close to his victims. And how many others like him are out there, wearing uniforms they didn't earn, claiming roles they don't have, waiting patiently on the edges of places where the vulnerable sleep unprotected. I never worked at camps again. I can't. Every time I see a ranger uniform, my heart races. Every time I'm in the woods at dusk, I look for figures lurking in the shadows, because I learned something at Camp Whispering Pines. Trust is a dangerous luxury. Paranoia, as uncomfortable as it may be, is sometimes the only thing that keeps you, and those in your care, safe from the kind of monsters that don't need fangs or claws.